I call this meeting of the Urbana City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alex?
Here.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Here.
Mr. Hayes? Ms. Pat? Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Whalen?
Here.
Ms. Wyman? Mayor Satterthwaite?
Here. We have a quorum. First item on the agenda this evening is approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. Is there a motion?
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Any additions or corrections to the agenda this evening? We'll go on to petitions and communications. We have several this evening. If anybody is in the audience and would like to speak to the council for a period of up to 5 minutes, if you can fill out one of these white cards, it's at the back of the room, bring it up to myself or the clerk, and you'll get a chance to do so. First is Gabe Omoasagi, 2409 North High Cross Road, progress report.
Thank you. Well, I'll be as brief as possible so I can get away from the people more concerned with the church. This is just a progress report as far as I'm concerned. This is in following up with what we discussed, or what you discussed last week about the single-family houses. I was surprised to find out that at least 3 different people called me, and they're interested in selling their houses to me. So it was good. But one of the strange things was one of the people said, well, you know, that they had been approached by some members of WUNA and told that they shouldn't, that I intend on destroying the neighborhood and they should not sell to me. So I laughed. I said, well, you know, I mean, they should remember that it's because of people like them that I'm in a protected class. If you start going around talking to people not to sell their houses to me, now you're violating the federal law, which you guys put me in, you know, a protected class. You can't. So what's going to happen is, you know, I mean, I don't agree with what you're doing, but I know that sometimes activists never know when to stop. You know, just like a dramatist sometimes over-dramatizes himself. So obviously, with what you're doing, I'm going to do what I have to do too, in the sense that this country has been very good to me. I've made some money, and it's time to put my money where my mouth is. So obviously, most of these people that are being displaced from Lakeside Terrace, those who are the huddled masses, yearning to live in nice places, I'm going to be bringing them to the West Urbana neighborhood. Hopefully they'll have good role models. And for the people who are trying to stop me from buying houses, of course I put a call into JC. You know, I'm not talking Jesus Christ here. You know, Johnny Cochran. And he's told me that there might be a rush to judgment here. He said that might be something we need to take a look at. So, well, why don't they want you to buy houses? I said, I don't know. You know, I mean, I don't think it has anything to do with race, because usually these people they're liberals, and they usually like diversity. He said, well, how diverse is the neighborhood? Oh, I said, we have Anna Walcott, and I think Dan Pinahughes used to live there. He said, is that it? I said, yeah. I said, but I want to bring some brothers down there. I said, you know, and you know, I talked to some brothers who want to move to that neighborhood. They love, you know, the Cadillac Brougham. I'm sure. Are you guys familiar with that car? They used to make them. I think they stopped making them in the 70s. Brothers call them Brohams. You know, so they're going to be parking a lot of those cars in your neighborhood, and then we're going to force the issue and really see if you don't want them there. And the more you guys would harass, you know, I'm sure you'll come up with some other law and try to prevent these people from living there. You're going to give all kinds of things and all kinds of reasons, but then we're going to really know how you feel about this issue. So obviously, I'm not going to talk about this issue anymore. I just want you to know that I've thrown my hat in the ring, and I'm ready for action, and I welcome all comers. Thank you.
Sir, I just have a question for you. Are you a licensed realtor in Illinois?
No, I'm
You're not,
an owner.
okay.
I don't sell.
Oh, I understand,
I'm an
okay.
owner, yeah.
I just wanted to express my concern. I think
Sure.
you made a good point that obviously anyone who is saying don't sell your houses to you
Sure.
is running the risk of running afoul of various ordinances which and federal laws
Oh,
which
no, I'm not,
prohibit discrimination in
I'm not going
housing.
to be bringing them to the Urbana Human Rights Ordinance.
No, I understand, but at the same time, I have to warn you, the Illinois Association of Realtors has a provision in their code of ethics which bars something called block busting, and I'm sure you may have heard this term before. In effect, that is when a realtor seeks to depress housing values and force sales based on creating fear that members of a protected class may be moving into the neighborhood. And while you may not,
Thank you
I'm
very
not
much.
sure whether you're technically bound by that or
Yes,
not,
thank you very much.
but I would warn you that any
No,
realtor...
hold on a second. Thank you very much for bringing that up. So what you're saying directly is exactly what Johnny Coughlin's office told me. So because black people are going to be moving in, you think that the property values are going to be depressed.
No.
I thought we fought that fight in the 60s.
I am certainly not saying that. And
Okay, what are
I'm
you
being very
saying?
careful not saying it. What I'm saying is that any realtor who goes into a neighborhood and says, if members of this protected class move in, your property values is going down,
No, nobody's
is
saying
violating
that.
the code
I
of
haven't
ethics
even
of the
said
Illinois
that.
Association
I
of
haven't even
Realtors.
said that.
Okay.
I've not said that, and I don't know where you're reading that. You see, that's what I'm saying. This is your underlying fear and your underlying prejudice. That's exactly what I'm saying. You see, we've not even gone further. I've not even got any house yet. And
No,
yet you're talking about blockbusting.
No.
No, we're not blockbusting. What I'm saying is, this country's been good to me. These people deserve good housing, and we're going to put them there. That's all I'm saying. We're going to buy as many houses as I can in West Urbana, very close to where you guys live, and that's it. They deserve to have role models like professors instead of pimps.
I can't agree with you more.
Thank you.
However, I'm saying
Yeah.
that statements that you made at the last meeting before this body,
Sure.
had you been a realtor,
I'm not a
I
realtor.
believe would have been treading the line with what we would consider, or what the Illinois Association of Realtors would consider blockbusting, which is in effect playing the race card and saying,
Well,
we want you to do this
on a
because
second.
you are prejudiced or
Hold on a
because you
second,
have
hold on a
fear
second.
of members of
If
a
you talk
protected
about
class
the
moving
race
into your
card,
neighborhood.
It's a joker in my pack. You see, it was people like you, liberals, who decided to give me that card. You guys decided that I cannot protect myself, and therefore you put me in a situation that you call me a protected class. So when the time comes, if I feel that you guys are not doing it the right way, I'll pull that card up. That's why I said, to get the best advice, we might be fighting this thing on a national level. That's why I talked to JC, and he said there might be a rush to judgment. So let's not make a rush. So what you've just said is part of what he's saying, a rush to judgment. So just hold your fire. Like I said, my hat is in the ring. I welcome all comments. So if you're going to take it on, I'm doing it because this country has been very good to me. I used to sell ice cream to them, in the early 80s. I started my business by riding a bicycle in those neighborhoods and collecting those pennies. And that's where I got my money from. So it's time to give them something back. And I'm going to give it back to them by giving them good houses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next is, we have a presentation from the 40 North and 88 West. Susan Herman is here, along with Jennifer Armstrong. Welcome.
Thank you. On behalf of the board and staff of 40 North, 88 West, we'd like to present this honorary board member certificate to the mayor for your support of the arts in the city of Urbana and efforts of 40 North throughout the county. We appreciate your recognition of what the arts can bring to a community. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks, and I'd like to congratulate 40 North on all the work they've been doing over the last 3 or 4 years since you've been in operation. I know it's a fledgling organization, but you've done a lot with the Boneyards Art Festival and a lot of other arts festivals to bring the arts out and to the people, so I appreciate everything you've been doing.
Yes, here.
Next is Byung H. Chow, 3909 Clubhouse Drive in Champaign on the variance of the Presbyterian Church.
Thank you, Mayor and Council members. My name is Byung-H Cho, an elder of Korean Church. I joined the Korean Church in November 1974. At the time, Korean Church moved to Urbana Presbyterian Church. I would like to make a few comments on a unique situation between two churches, the Urbana Presbyterian Church and the Korean Church, current joint building project. The Urbana Church provides the ground for the building. The Korean Church will pay the construction cost, approximately $900,000. Although it is called the Korean Mission Center and will be paid by Korean Church, Urbana Church will have the title of the property. This is a unique and unprecedented cooperation between the two churches based on faith and mutual trust. It all started because of a breakdown of an old boiler in the brick house at 608 West Green Street. The city inspector came to inspect the boiler and shut the gas off due to the gas leakage. The estimated cost of installation of a new boiler and ductwork was very high. At the evaluation of many options, a new building project was conceived as a better option for the long run. There were other maintenance problems in old brick house, such as water leakage from the roof. Over the years, we Korean Church knew that Korean Church has caused a headache to Urbana Church congregation because of the smell of Korean food, especially a smelly kimchi. The Urbana Church member never formally complained, but they have endured and graciously tolerated. There were other problems such as messing up the restrooms, fellowship room, and many other areas. Urbana Church helped the Korean Church a great deal in many unselfish ways through the last 30 years. One of the main objectives of this building plan was to provide a kitchen facility fitted for Korean cooking with a large eating space. The other areas, including office and meeting rooms, add up to approximately 10,000 square feet. The elevation of the smell of Korean food will be a big relief for Urbana Church congregation members. Korean Church holds a regular Sunday worship service once a week between 1 and 3:30 p.m. There are only few small group meetings during the week. Therefore, there will be no traffic congestion during the week. I hope these comments will help you for the favorable consideration for the approval of zoning variation for the joint building project of the Urbana Presbyterian Church and the Korean Church. Thank you.
Questions?
I had one. I don't actually have before me the floor plan of the church, and I believe it's the basement, which we had passed out large ones last time we were meeting, and they don't seem to be around. But I do remember that there was like a large section that was labeled storage in the basement, and I was wondering, not all of the floor space is devoted to either offices or meetings, if there's going to be storage there, and I was just wondering what's going to be stored, or was it necessary to have storage? You designated the area as storage, and I'm just curious about that. It seems like a peripheral use, and I'm just kind of wondering about it.
Actually, I don't have much knowledge on that area, but since there are, we have many graduate students and college students, they move around a lot during the semesters. During that time, some of their belongings they bring to the church. And we used to have when our church that fellowship room. Sometimes they had some spaces is not supposed to store the personal items, but students they come there, they just live there, and just for during the semester or during the semester break or when they leave the town. So in that case, we need some extra space for store some things for the students. We found a lot of items they just left behind.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Key Lee, 403 East Holmes, on the Presbyterian Church.
Thank you for this opportunity to talk to you again. Let me answer the question the Councilman, Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
asked previously. I'm more informed than Elder Joe. Upstairs, we have one big kitchen and office spaces and one big hall. It can be used as a dining room as well. It's kind of a reception hall. Downstairs, mostly it is the classrooms and large restroom and some storage, but storage space is not that much.
So the basement is
Classrooms.
looks like 2 classrooms?
Two big ones, 6 small ones, something like that.
Okay.
And the about 10,000 square foot include basement and upstairs. So it's one-story building outside once it is built. Its skyline is much lower than former demolished building. It's one story. And if we don't include basement area, it's below the FAR ratio required by the city. It is 10,000 square feet is include both upstairs and downstairs. I'm surprised why the basement is included. So the building is not that big, the ugly building at all. It is one-story size building, which is well mixed with the existing building of the church as well, neighborhood. Some people call the First Presbyterian Church's facility buildings are ugly, but I feel it's entirely personal view. I feel it's very beautiful. Let me talk about a couple of things which we discussed, we argued throughout last several weeks. First, parking. I myself checked the parking situation during Sundays. Weekdays, there's no problem. Not many people will show up at the church. Sundays, and I felt current parking situation is not that bad at all. Since the First Presbyterian Church expanded its parking lot, the situation is a lot improved than old days. And some of the parking issues still remain. So what we do is some latecomers try to park their car on the yellow line, which is forbidden. So Korean Church now provide parking attendant during the Sunday service hours and use the orange cone to mark, do not park some area which is not allowed. So I think parking issue is not really, that's my personal view, shouldn't be related to the approval of this FAR ratio. Parking issue is critical, but it should be handled separately. That's what I feel. And as you know, the north side of Elm Street is no parking zone. Nobody cannot park it. Parking is only south side of the Elm Street. And what I noticed is many cars parked over there, it doesn't belong to both churches at all. It belongs to neighborhood residents. They usually park their car over there. You can check it tomorrow morning. You will find cars over there. Maybe some students whose house is away from the church, with campus, may park their car there and walk to campus. I don't know that part, but most cars doesn't belong to churches. That's one point. And the second is traffic volume. Some people, some neighbors argue with traffic volume. We know traffic volume has increased a lot, but actually it's not just due to the churches. It's due to many new apartments in the neighborhood. There are new buildings, as you know. And actually, with approval or with not, some visitors to the apartments or tenants park their cars in church parking lot. That's what I found too. So actually, church providing some parking space for them. And traffic, if KMC is built, Korean church, offices of Korean church, and some small programs, now which is being held at 607 West Elm Street, will move to KMC, Korean Mission Center, which is on the Green Street. So traffic on the Elm Street will be apparently reduced than now. I can guarantee that part. Traffic volume issue is again, it's not really a matter of the new construction of KMC. It is matter of, the growth of a neighborhood. That's what I can name it. The third point is preservation of history. I myself want to preserve some good historical tradition, not only visible one, invisible one too. Traditional, the historical values. I really cherish for that. But we should identify which one to preserve, which one we shouldn't. Something which is dangerous, we don't need to preserve it, dangerous ones. And if we cannot maintainable, just like the building which was demolished and located at 608 West Green, just Elder Cho mentioned, it is not maintainable, it's not useful for public health or public safety. So that's why we demolished it, and in replacement, we want this new building. It's not, we want, we don't want new building at the new the empty land. We want to replace all the building with new one. But of course, total floor area ratio would be increased, but half of that is on the basement.
Mr. Lee, are you about done? Your time is up.
Okay, then I'll stop right here. Can I get 2 more minutes?
Well, normally we could grant that, but we've probably got 30 or 40 people that want to speak tonight, and if they all take over the time limit, we're never going to make a decision on this.
Okay. So what I feel is it's nice to respect minor opinions, but majority of neighborhood approve our plan, and you should be aware of that. And our plan will improve the neighborhood in its beauty and in its value, instead of destroying it. So, the people our neighbor who approved this plan actually didn't show up here. They just quietly approved it. But just a few who oppose, just I hear and make, a position. Yeah, but you should compare merit toward some parts we are losing. But apparently this project, is really, well to accommodate the city's future plan. That's what I feel. Thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you. Next is Jay Lee, 403 East Holmes.
I'm sorry, I must have signed the wrong card. I'm just here to support the variance, but I don't wish to speak.
Okay, wants to be in support of the variance, does not wish to speak. Liz Greeley, 2206 Curitan. Supports the variance, does not wish to speak. Richard Underwood, 2401 Pond, on the Presbyterian Church.
I'll give 4 of my minutes to Mr. Lee, who has just used them up. I think that I made my position clear at the last meeting. I thank you all for your attention to the matter. I think the points that Mr. Lee made are extremely valid. The mass of the building, in other words, if we had built only a one-story building in a location, if we had planned only a one-story building, there would be nothing to come to the board or the council for approval. So the fundamental question is the basement causing all that much trouble? It doesn't change the appearance of anything. And in my opinion, since it will not increase the usage significantly, it will only mean that we have room to stretch instead of being crowded. I certainly hope that you will see fit to approve this variance. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next is Ann Ricker, 703 Washington.
I do not wish to speak, but I approve of the variance.
Okay, does not wish to speak, but approves the variance. Ann Berger also says she does not wish to speak, but is in favor of the variance for the Presbyterian Church. Reverend Don Mason, 707 Brighton.
Good evening. In the interest of time, I will not repeat the points I tried to make 2 weeks ago when we met, but rather use this moment to share a little bit of additional information about what's happened since that time. You will notice by the presence of many members of our 2 churches here tonight that we've not lost any of our zeal or enthusiasm for the jointly planned and shared Korean Mission Center. To demonstrate the concern of those who are here, fortunately for you, not all of them will want to speak. Would it be permitted for me to ask the members of our 2 congregations to stand up and acknowledge their support for this project?
Objection?
Bravo, bravo.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We believe the expansion is necessary to replace an inadequate facility. We believe it's possible to build and utilize this addition without adversely affecting our neighborhood. The intensity of the use will not change significantly. The lower level will not be visible from the street. Mostly I want to use this moment to make public a communication that I've already sent to each of you members of the council, summarizing some steps that the 2 churches are taking to deal with the concerns of our neighbors. I think the silver lining in all of this is that we're utilizing a window of opportunity to improve the communication and the strategies to make our community work better. I won't belabor number 1, the parking problems, because that's already been described, some of the steps we're taking about the monitors and the cones. 2, we will, in late August and September, when we have a great number of newcomers to both churches, we'll take some additional steps to educate our congregations about parking. We believe that our 115 off-street parking slots, that's a correction from the memo I sent you, 115 off-street parking slots already help in a major way to alleviate the parking situation. Number 3, we've named a new landscaping committee, including several of our neighbors in an advisory capacity, to evaluate the appearance of the church grounds and to make needed recommendations to our Board of Trustees. 4, we'll negotiate with our neighbors at Buena Vista Court to determine steps we can take to increase their privacy and to reduce the intrusion of headlights and other commotion in their homes while our newly installed landscaping reaches maturity. Number 5, we've been working with the Mass Transit District to explore building a bus stop shelter at the corner of Orchard and Green Streets to make public transportation a more enjoyable and inviting experience for our neighbors and for our church members. Number 6, we'll designate one of our members to work with the West Urbana Neighborhood Association and to keep us abreast of the issues and concerns there. And 7, In addition to the major interior work recently completed in all church properties, we'll give renewed attention to the exterior appearances of these buildings, including the residence at 607 West Elm Street. While we would not want to limit the possibilities to these 7 steps, we share them tonight to give some concrete evidence of our intention to become better neighbors, to listen to and take seriously all the concerns expressed, and to work together to improve the appearance, the ambiance of our neighborhood. We believe the mission of our 2 churches will be strengthened and the concerns of our neighbors will be better addressed by steps such as these. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Yes, Mr. Whalen?
I'm just curious to know, when you use the building north of on Elm Street, what was the effect of that on the neighborhood? You use it for church purposes.
The building at 607 West Elm Street?
Yes.
Well, it's been used since it was purchased by a member of the church and donated to the church. It was used primarily for rental of residents until, as an emergency provision, we cleared those people out and when the leases were expired, and turned it over to the Korean church to replace for their offices and small group activities during the week.
What did they use it for?
Right now?
What did they use it for?
Well, you're speaking of the house on Elm Street.
Yes, 607 Elm.
Yes, that house is used by the Korean church right now for offices and small group meetings.
You see, what was the impact on Wednesday night, Wednesday when you had services? Did they use it then?
I'm not sure I understand about Wednesday night.
Oh, isn't that when they have services on Wednesday night?
No, they have, the Korean church worship services are in the same sanctuary as the First Presbyterian Church, and that is on Sunday afternoon.
Only on Sunday?
That's the major worship experience. There are other events for college students on evenings and rehearsals, and virtually every evening there's something going on at the church.
But is there any major use of it as far as a large community, large crowd?
Not ordinarily. For example, when we invited our neighbors to a 4th neighborhood meeting last Thursday evening, and it was pointed out that there were 7 events happening at the church at the same time, and you wouldn't be aware of it from the parking lot, from the streets, or even from the lights, because some were down in the basement, some were in the sanctuary, some were in the library, some in the fellowship hall. So typically, there's a lot more going on inside than you'll notice from the congestion outside.
That was the reason for asking the question. What is the impact on the neighborhood of the use of that building, and then consequently the new addition? What would that be? Similar?
The intention is to continue our present programs and not to expand them in a dramatic way, so that the impact intensity-wise on the use of the streets and the parking would be very minimal.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Next is Barclay Jones of 310 East Holmes on the variance for the First Presbyterian Church. Supports the variance, does not wish to speak. John Dimmitt, 3206 Barronry.
I'm a member of the Urbana First Presbyterian Church and do wish to speak in support of the variance. I think it's important to note that I've been a member of the church. I first joined the church in the late 1950s as a child. I've been a member of various long-range planning committees of the church. And we oftentimes started our long-range committee meetings by trying to decide what the future of the church should be in the very long term. And there's one big major choice that we had to face, which is to remain in the downtown area and commit to downtown Urbana and commit to not creating sprawl, or to go to the outside of the community. A church of our type would probably be interested in 10, 15 acres if we moved to the outside of the community. And that was a very important decision. But that decision relied upon the ability to continue our mission from our current location. And that does involve a certain element of growth, and you have to allow for that to occur. Churches are a part of a vital neighborhood. Vital neighborhoods are not simply made up of houses. It takes schools, churches, and other institutions to keep a neighborhood vital. And so it's important that groups like ours make decisions to stay downtown, but it's also important that we have a partnership when we try to do that. I'd like to point out that if we were building this building and we left the basement unfinished, we wouldn't be in front of you, because then it wouldn't count towards FAR, even if we came back 5 years later and finished the basement out. So I think that the church has done what it could to try to minimize the impact of this addition on the area and on the neighborhood. Also, I'd like to point out that I used to live, for 20 years I lived where I could walk to church. I don't anymore. I have to drive. But it is much to my chagrin to show up on a Sunday morning to find a parking place, only to find out that we provided parking places for the guests of the people that live in the Oaks, the people that live in Buena Vista. And so the church has been a partner with the area. And if there are parking problems, the parking problems go two ways. I drove in just about 3 weeks ago and couldn't find a place to park, but did observe people walking back and forth between Buena Vista and into our parking lot. It was probably parents of some kids that lived in there, or some younger people that lived in there. And it was a big weekend. It might have been 4 weeks ago. It was a big weekend on campus. We've gotten used to that as a church, and we kind of roll with the punches. And so I would hope that we wouldn't let some issues like a discussion about parking get in the way of us being good neighbors to that community as much as we can be. And I think that it's important, I just want to close with, it's important that we make sure that our institutions have the ability to stay in the central part of this community, as well as we allow our residents to stay in the central part of the community.
Entertain a question. Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes, I have a question, John. Are you aware of any expansion plans after this expansion?
I was part of a long-range planning committee that put together a very long-term expansion project for the church, probably over the next 30 or 40 years. And it's important that we look at that. And the reason we did that is we didn't want to build anything today that would get in the way of future expansions in the long-term future. Yes, there are.
Okay, and do you, I haven't had an opportunity to speak to you because I didn't know you were on the long-range planning committee.
I'm not on the one that planned this expansion.
Oh, you aren't? Okay.
No.
Would you support joint planning with the city of Urbana concerning future expansion?
Well, I think that you all as a city have to consider how you would approach that, because there is a church and state separation issue that you have to deal with. I would think that we would certainly want to be good citizens as we move forward on that. It will be vital, however, to have some element of cooperation. For instance, we own the property on both sides of Orchard Street. Right now, it's a safety factor having that between our off-street parking and our building, and it might be something that we would look at in the future jointly with the city.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Great, thank you. Next is James Yoon, 1804 Winchester Drive.
Good evening, and thank you for your infinite patience. You know, I had written a nice passage, but of course a lot of our colleagues have taken it up. So I missed the last meeting, but I was in previous board meetings, and I understand that some of you feel that even with the extraordinary amount of money and deliberation and design considerations that many of us have talked about, there are no special circumstances which justify the council to grant the major variance. And so some of you feel that the council should overturn the recommendations of the previous boards, as well as those of your own planners. And I understand that the focus of the concern is that By granting this major variance, you would be setting a dangerous precedent for future developers because the current project does not fall within the usual measure of special circumstances as defined by, are we hemmed in by historical landmarks, a point which I think is arguable because the Ricker house is actually adjacent to our property, or by the odd shape of our lot. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if this argument is going to fly, but I would like to suggest, or maybe argue, that indeed there are special circumstances in this project, not necessarily measured in terms of odd property lines or historical landmarks, but by something that's far important to a city and to us all. And second, I'd like to set you at peace, if I possibly can, that by granting this variance, you would not be setting a dangerous precedent. By that I mean it will set a precedent, but one which actually raises the stakes for any future developer, rather than opening a back door for a floodgate of litigations against the city that will effectively nullify the MOR zoning. I think so for the following reasons, because number one, we have a long and distinguished history of multi-ethnic cooperation and partnership, which is special, but in fact I think it's something more than special. I think many of us have come to this body and the bodies before that, pointing out that it is unique within the presbytery in which our churches are situated. It's unique within the state, and I dare to say it's maybe unique in the entire nation. And secondly, I was told that you actually had to prove hardship conditions exist for granting special variance. And if you actually come and observe some of our programs as it is being run, especially the Korean congregation here, we are actually filled with hardships. First of all, we simply have to cut off many programs because we just cannot find the space or the time within which to squeeze those programs. And if you come on a Sunday or on weekends, which is where most of our activities are, you would actually see that our groups are being pushed into hallways and outdoors and into pastors and into secretaries' offices. If that's not hardship, I don't know what hardship is. And furthermore, I think the building, the Korean Mission Center, will be a visible piece of identity, and I dare say empowerment, and a symbol for a large minority ethnic group. And along with a mosque that stands on Lincoln Street, the synagogue on campus, it'll be a welcoming symbol of racial and religious harmony, openness, and diversity that the city and its inhabitants should be proud of. So that the denial of the project could result in possible disenfranchisement of a large minority congregation, forcing us, the Korean Church, to seek alternative sites in the not-so-distant future and requiring us to part ways unwillingly with our partner with whom we have stood side by side for over 30 years. The prospect doubtless is a grave setback to the richness, openness, and diversity that the city and the university have prided themselves on. And needless to say, it will be a stinging blow to the unique and mutually enriching experiences of our two congregations. Now, let me just address finally the concern about increased intensity of use. I think it should be laid to rest. Some of our members have already spoken to that, because we're not building something that we do not need right now, hoping that as we build it, people will come and fill it. It's not the field of dreams. The field is here now. We need it, and otherwise people are being disenfranchised and inconvenienced. The building is for the very present and long-standing needs of the Korean Church, and not based on any of our ambition to grow eventually into a building, thereby increasing the intensity of use. The intensity, as many of us stated already, in terms of human and traffic flow, is not comparable to a multi-family housing of the same size. The use is not constant, as we know, and as we all agree, on weekday and weeknights, usages currently do not create any problems of any order for any of our neighbors. So all things said, I do not think that these are the kinds of arguments that can be marshaled by developers that seek justification to build basement apartments so they can have more profit. The council would not have set a dangerous precedent in allowing this variance. In fact, it would have set the standards for future requests even higher than those based on the tangible measures of irregular lots or historical landmarks. Thank you.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you. Next is Gwen Zarbuck, 507 G.H. Baker Drive, representing First Methodist Church. This is a different church and a different subject. So, just to make that clear.
This is a concern about the Lincoln Square parking ordinance changes. It has nothing to do with any growth or anything of that nature. Basically, our church is adjacent to two city parking lots designated 10E North and South. There were several concerns with this proposed ordinance changes, and we only recently, last week, became aware of these. Ms. Chenoweth and some of the staff has helped rectify some of our concerns, whether we would have problems parking in the evenings and on weekends. There's also a question of, we had some reserved parking places which were put in effect through an agreement that we had with the city back when Ray Street was expanded. That's been clarified. There's two concerns we still have. Basically, going back to that agreement with the city, it involved a clarification that Jim Darling gave when he was Public Works Director, a letter I have dated 12/28/2083, and there was to be 3 open parking places along High Street extended, and that would be on the south side of the church. Under your current map of the parking changes, those are in a grade area in there. We want to make sure that those remain open. They were not to be reserved places for the church, but open for non-church members or whoever would end up in those places. We expect that to remain the same. The other concern is basically we have a problem with small group meetings, funerals, various piecemeal functions, things which happen during the week. And this involves noontime hours, things that are mainly seniors. And many of these people would have a great hardship if they were forced to walk from the parking deck or someplace like that. As it currently stands, those 2 lots will be permit parking only. The permit's going to residents in the newly constructed apartments and people that work at Lincoln Square. So we would wish that we could somehow come to an agreement with the city and Mr. Webster with these. I have a petition here signed by 150 people over this weekend asking the council to delay this action until we can reach a concordance with the parties involved. I talked to Mr. Webster today. He said he wanted to be a good neighbor, and we appreciate the growth that the church or the council is having with Lincoln Square, but we would like to see some degree of compromise on this parking lot. We also have a daycare center which has, of course, children being dropped off in the morning and picked up in the evening. There would be no place for those people to park if the ordinance was regulated as written. So we have a problem. So I'd ask your consideration in that, please.
Okay, any questions, Ms. Chenoweth?
3 quick questions, just because when we talked earlier, I didn't have the materials before me. The 3 open parking spaces, probably you were referring to the lot. Are you referring to the finger that goes up to the north? I mean, is
No.
that basically directly to the west of your building?
No, it's directly south
To the
of that
south of the
extension of the building. There's 3 places there. It would be High Street extended. If
Okay. And then the second question I had is, given that what I have on the question you had to me before, which was you had assumed that there was no customer parking in your area, but Lot 10E on my map is actually customer parking with 2-hour limitation. That would serve for weekday functions with seniors, correct? I mean, that if people could park nearby the church for increments of no more than 2 hours, that would, as long as you had an understanding with the mall, which it sounds that you could work something out, that would take care of that concern. Is that correct? No, there's, well, I don't know how many spaces are on here because it's not marked, but Lot 10E North is quite.
10E North has 11 spaces.
11 spaces.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what I was referring to. 11 spaces is customer parking right around the area.
One is senior citizen or handicapped, and
Okay.
5 on each side.
Okay.
And of course, that 10 places would probably be sufficient in most cases, but you have no control who's going to be in those 10 spaces when they come in at 11 o'clock or 11:30 or noon or whatever the case may be.
Okay.
We would like it expanded, I guess we'd say, or issued some type of permits for staff. I think we can reach a compromise.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions, Mr. Alex?
Just wanted to clarify, sir, your desire is that the council defer this until such time as you and the relevant parties have had time to work out a mutually beneficial agreement?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Evelyn Denson, 803 West Indiana. Again, this is with the First Methodist Church and the Children's Day Care Center.
Hi. I'm the director at Children's Center Daycare, and we have around 65 families at the daycare, and it's sort of an international daycare. We're a nonprofit daycare. We're sponsored by the church, and we also have a sliding scale tuition fee. So the child's tuition is based on their income and their age and family size. There's very few parking spots in that north parking lot, and it's usually filled up right now with a variety of people use it. Lincoln Square people use it. Some Lincoln Square tenants use it. I've worked at this location for 25 years, so you get to know people who park around the lots and who everyone is. We are going to have around 60 parents that are going to be dropping off and picking up children. So the primary time that we need the use of the lot is in the early morning and later afternoon, from 4:30 to 5:30, 7:30 to 9. So we don't take up the parking spots during the day. We have a few people who come in late or drop off or pick up, but it's not taking up a lot of spots. Usually those parking spots on 10E North, some of them are already restricted for Lincoln Square tenants. The church itself has some staff parking along one side, so there's really only 10 open spots. Those are usually filled from about 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock by people in and out of Lincoln Square. Probably some customers, a variety of people. So if you take what's been a previously opened parking lot with time restrictions, you're always going to have time restrictions. I agree. I live in the west side of Urbana. I know why and, that it's needed. On 10 East South, we're not going to have the parking spots for parents to drop off and pick up. So they're going to be double parking, which causes traffic congestion, and it's dangerous for the children. If we don't have some parking, that's available at parts of the day, it's going to, it has a good chance of putting the daycare out of business. And the daycare has been there over 30 years serving this community. We've had a lot of families. I was here last Monday night. There were a lot of audience members, either realtors or homeowners that had been, families at Children's Center. So I'd like to see the daycare stay open. I think we can work out with the church city some availability of parking for our parents coming in and out. The spaces would still be there for Lincoln Square customers during the day. They're only open 10 to 5. There's never been a full parking lot at Lincoln Square for quite a few years. And I think with Health Alliance using some of them, they will be more full, but I think there's going to be open parking. So I would like to have some spots available for Children's Center families. Thanks. Do you have any questions?
Questions? Yes, Ms. Pat?
Just one quick question. Where do the parents park now when they drop
In
off?
10
East South?
South. 10 East South. And occasionally there might be a spot open on 10E North. That's just not very feasible, that parking lot. It's always walkers park there, just lots of different people that go in and out of Lincoln Square. Or they cut across to the courthouse or, a variety of things. Post office.
So,
Roberts?
Yes. So the 3 spots that are directly south of the door would not, by any chance, adequately service dropping off.
No.
There would have to be a lot more than that.
Like
How many
20
more do you think?
20 at least.
20
Spots.
Spots.
For short periods of time is the problem. It's not like they start coming at 7:30. We probably have 5 parents coming in and out, and then there's another 10. So before 9 o'clock, we probably have close to 60 children arrive at the center.
And do they come at pretty much various times in the morning?
Right.
Because their work schedules are
Right.
different, right? Is that why?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of students, graduate students. We have city employees. You know, we've had Health Alliance employees. You know, some of those are 8 to 5 people, so that means they have to drop off before 8, and they pick up at 5:15.
You're open at 7:30. When do you close?
5:30.
5:30. So within half an hour after that, most of the people should have been picked up and...
Everybody should be out of the building by 5:30.
Okay.
I mean, if there are people left, you know, there's the usual late fee, or
I see.
it's not often, and it would only be, you know, one spot or two.
So you'd really need those spots all day long, practically.
We need some spots all day long.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Next is Linda Lorenz. She says she does not wish to speak. Can't read. I know she spoke last week in opposition to the variance. Is there anything else you wanted to say, Linda?
No, I'm just concerned about the residential quality of the neighborhood.
Oh, concerned about the residential quality of the neighborhood. Okay. Okay, thank you. Next is Krista Borbely, 1312 South Race. Does not wish to speak, but wants to be recorded as in favor of the variance for the First Presbyterian and Korean churches. Next is Harold Geither, 613 Harding.
I support the variance, but I do not wish to speak.
Okay, supports variance, does not wish to speak. Maria Ryan, 1 Buena Vista Court.
Hi, I will not belabor the points that I've already made to this body and to several other boards as this issue has progressed. I just wanted to come up to make 2 comments before you take your vote on the issue this evening. One thing I think is really important to keep in mind is that the vote that you are looking at tonight is not a decision about whether the church can build or cannot build. The church can build up to 5,900 square feet without this variance. So it's not about whether the church can build or not. It's simply about whether they can build 5,900 feet or 10,000 feet. As far as my second point that I wanted to make has to do with the precedent that this can set if you vote in favor of the variance. And that is a serious issue. I wish that some of the things that Mr. Yoon said were actually true, that there was some kind of legal way to say that because an organization has certain positive characteristics for the community that it's in, that therefore that creates a special circumstance with regard to zoning. Would that were true, but I think all of you who have worked with some of these zoning issues in the past know that, unfortunately that's not true, and that if you grant the variance, that you will in fact set a legal precedent that will allow anyone to come along and ask for this kind of a variance if they simply put the extra square footage below grade. That means that, not just a church, but any kind of a small business that's allowed an allowed use within a residential or MOR neighborhood, say a local video store or a convenience store, or any of these other kinds of businesses, if they want to expand to an FAR that is, well, in this case, we're talking about an FAR that's higher than is allowed in industrial zoning. If they want to expand to that kind of a size, all they have to do is go below grade. And if you get a request like that in the future and you refuse it, and that person decides to sue, you're not going to have any grounds to stand on to uphold that decision. So what you decide tonight is not simply about this particular case, and it's not simply about this particular project. It has an impact on the whole city and all the neighborhoods in the city. So with that, I will take any questions if anybody has any.
Hey, any questions? Next is Rachel Leibowitz, 6 Buena Vista Court. Excuse me, that's the variance.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to speak. I've sent very lengthy emails or rambling letters to all or most of you explaining my position that I am greatly opposed to this variance. And I would definitely like to second everything that Ms. Ryan just said. Also to say that I'm a bit sorry to hear in a way that if what the first speaker said is true, that they have $900,000 to put into this very large new building, that they had not thought of perhaps preserving the building that they have already torn down. $900,000 could have gone a long way to really make that building almost like new. I'm a graduate of the architecture school here, and I'm a student of landscape architecture and history. I'm a preservationist. I moved to Buena Vista Court because I love the character of the court and the character of the neighborhood. And as a graduate student, I have to say that I'm in the neighborhood a lot. I'm not in classes that much anymore. I do walk up and down the street, but I'm at home most of the time. I'm reading, I'm writing. And I noticed that for a lot of the people who are in favor of the variance, when their names are called and their addresses, they don't seem to be that near to the church. They seem to be coming to the church. Maybe they're there 5 days a week and working there, but still, the church is a place where they go and then they leave. We're there all the time. And I think that the expansion that they're proposing will have a far greater effect on the neighborhood than they really will admit to, or at least as far as they can imagine. I'm just very concerned about a terrific change to the character of the neighborhood. I think that even though they are proposing to use materials that match their existing structure, that it is an addition that is well out of proportion and scale with the rest of the neighborhood, even if it is a mixed-use zone. I am also concerned about their plans for further expansion in the future, including, as one prior speaker alluded, the possible vacating of Orchard Street, because apparently Orchard Street is a danger to their congregants who might park in the parking lot there and then have to walk across the street. I think it just frightens me to consider that the church might actually want to expand to the whole block, and I don't think that's impossible. But in any event, I am opposed to this variance, and I just wanted to make that clear. And thank you.
Any questions, Ms. Chenoweth?
I just wanted to be able to ask you this directly rather than through hearsay, and I had to run out of our meeting the last time when we were meeting all as a group with the church. It's my understanding that you've been advocating for some kind of privacy or barrier between the north parking lot and Buena Vista Court, and the pastor has stated tonight that it's their intention to work with the neighborhood to develop that. Do you have any, is it your goal to have a fence, or do you have any input into what this council might be asking for in terms of a privacy barrier?
I definitely am in favor of a privacy barrier, but that doesn't make the proposed expansion smaller.
I understand
that's a concern
that.
of mine. But yes, I would definitely be in favor of a privacy fence. My house does back up right onto their parking lot. I do not use their parking lot, and when they removed all the shrubbery, now when people park there, especially in the wintertime, if they have to warm up their cars, their headlights might be on, they blast into our houses. And And one thing that's nice about church is that people get together, they get to see each other, and they get to meet and talk after church. And certainly people who park in that lot, their children might play, and parents will talk, and they'll have conversations, and those are all good things about church. But again, so there's noise, and there's people hanging out in the back of my house, as it were, because the house is so close to the parking lot. And when I bought my house, we had this wonderful, lush, tall, well over 6 feet tall, maybe almost close to 7 feet, dense shrubbery that they removed without any notice to us. And it's really changed the character of my home. I have to admit that I keep my blinds drawn on that side of the house all the time, even in the summertime when I have the windows open. So when a breeze comes through, the blinds are clanging. And so yes, a privacy screen would be nice, but that is not the only thing that I'm concerned about.
Okay, would you be willing to work with the church to, if this variance goes through, work with the church to figure out what kind of privacy barrier they could erect?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. Fences can be ugly and fences can be pretty.
Exactly.
There's definitely a way that it can be handled in an aesthetic way.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Mr. Roberts?
Right across from Buena Vista Court and Elm Street is the daycare center or the children's outdoor playground or whatever. And it looks like, I don't know the history of the church, but I assume it's been there probably for at least 10 years or so, maybe even before you lived in the home. That's a kind of an interactive location with a lot of activity as well. Has that ever caused you reason to complain, or?
I've never made a complaint to the church about it. I have an internal dialogue about it where when I'm writing or studying, I wish that, the kids weren't so loud. But from what I understand, the co-op rents from the church. I don't know what their real connection is with the church, if they're part of the church. My understanding is that they are a separate entity. They rent that space from the church. They're noisy. Little kids like to have a good time when they play, and shrieking and doing things like that are part of it. And what can I do? I can't tell kids to not make noise when they're running around playing, but they're quite noisy, yeah. And that is in operation, I think, all 5 days of the work week, certainly. I can't say if I'm even really aware if it's up and running on the weekends. I notice it most, I think, on the weekdays. I don't know if the play equipment is used by children whose parents are attending services on weekends. I'm not really sure. I mean, it seems like there are people there all the time, but it's more dense, it seems to me, on work days when parents are.
I'm just thinking that, it's an established part of the church, and it's been ongoing for a long time, and, to live near an institution is to be involved in all the different events that, occur around it, and it seems it would not be any different than maybe living next to a school play yard or something. And
it is quite like that, yeah. I mean, it's very busy.
That's just part of the neighborhood, and there's not much one can do about, that either, so I'm just wondering, if you're able to tolerate that, are there, I'm just trying to ascertain how serious, the loss of the hedge is compared to, some of the other interactions that are, have already been ongoing for years.
To tell you the truth, the parking lot and our proximity to it, and the fact that people in the parking lot now using it, they can see into our houses, their headlights come into our houses, and that they're hanging out there. It's a nuisance. I complained about it to the church. I went to talk to them about it. I went there 3 times. I left my name. I left my number. Nobody ever contacted me. Nobody ever wrote. Nobody ever called. And my feeling from that experience was that the church really doesn't care one way or the other. So if I had a complaint about the daycare or anything else, I just resigned myself to not going forward because I felt that they were unresponsive and that they did not care. So I've never bothered to complain any further about anything else, such as the daycare.
Well, it seems like this opportunity is giving a lot of people time to interact in a way that hasn't been appropriate or discovered before now, and if nothing else, at least people are dialoguing in some
Yeah,
ways.
I mean, if there can be communication now, because we are neighbors,
Yeah.
that's a good thing. I'm just sorry that it hasn't happened sooner when there were other things that they could have talked to residents about.
I think I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Wyman?
I just want to clarify that your opposition to this variance is based on the variance issues and the impacts, like on traffic and those sorts of things, rather than your perception that the church has not been responsive to your other issues.
Exactly,
of the parking,
exactly.
or the-
I mean, like I said, in seconding what Ms. Ryan was saying, I'm concerned that it's setting a precedent which would be bad for you, bad for everyone in the city of Urbana. But I also believe that with a much larger space, that they will be able to increase their uses, whether or not they say right now they intend to. I think that there'll be more traffic. I think there'll be more people coming in and out. I think that they'll be able to have meetings more often and at later into the evening. They'll have more space. I'm concerned that the building itself is out of scale. It's a little large for the neighborhood, and I'm concerned that the uses will increase and that there will be more people more of the time.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. And next is Nancy Welling of 2 Buena Vista Court.
Hi, thank you. When I first heard about the zoning variance request, I was just concerned about its immediate impact it would have on, in terms of, intensity, increased usage. I just find it hard to believe that when you go from 2,700 square feet approximately to approximately 10,000 square feet, you're not going to use the property more intensely. And I'm also hearing, conflicting stories or, ideas from, the people from the church who have spoken here tonight. Mr. Jung has said, it won't significantly increase intensity. I know you can't predict the future, but he's also said that they've had to cut off programs because there was not adequate space. To me, that seems like they plan on implementing those programs in the future when they do have adequate space, which would be increased intensity. My neighbor, Ms. Ryan, has spoken very eloquently about some of the concerns that I have. And I would like to note that the people who have spoken in opposition tonight are all owner-occupants of the houses immediately surrounding the church. The people in favor of it, as other people have said tonight, live much farther away and, don't have to live with the impact of the church's expansion. I think my major concern at this point is that the promises that my major concern is really that this is setting a dangerous precedent. I hate to see, further intense development of our neighborhood. I've lived in Buena Vista since 1988. I thought I was buying one of the most charming little houses I had ever seen. I couldn't believe my good fortune in actually living in one of them. And as I see all the houses around me being bulldozed, it just makes me sad. And I really think we need to be careful about what we allow to come in to that neighborhood. A church can be a good neighbor, but they are setting a precedent if they get the variance they request. Thank you.
Any questions? All right, thank you. Next is Wayne Cook, representing Aldi Did you want to speak now, or
No, I just wanted to be
available for questions?
aware that I'm here available.
Okay, all right. And next is Dixie Smith Jackson, 406 Yankee Ridge. Dixie?
I simply urge you to vote for this variance for the good of the neighborhood and for the good of the Korean and the American folks who have been cooperating there since the 1970s.
Okay, does not wish to come up and speak, but is in favor of the variance for the First Presbyterian Church. Next, Brian Adams, 412 West Elm. On 2 topics.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the Walgreens sign and the church ordinance. Should I just do them right now together?
Yeah, sure. Why
Okay.
not?
All right. Okay, I'll start with the church because I have, not the church, I'm sorry, the Walgreens sign. I just wanted to make a few comments regarding the variance request for the Walgreens sign. I guess I would prefer to see a monument-style sign installed in front of the proposed Walgreens store rather than the tall signs with the message boards that have been proposed. I agree that a less obtrusive sign is more appropriate at this location, as it will be a gateway to the downtown area once the area is renewed and redeveloped. I feel that a monument-style sign at this intersection could set a new standard for signage in the area and would be beneficial to the downtown area, as the unique appeal of such signs is more likely to draw potential customers farther down into the downtown area. I believe that most people in the area are familiar enough with the products available at Walgreens stores, and message boards of any type are really unnecessary, and that the absence of such message boards would really not have a negative effect on the business. So those are the comments I wanted to make about that particular issue. Regarding the church variance, the current situation with the First Presbyterian Church in part stems from the city's continued failure to implement one of the stated goals of the MOR district, the adaptive reuse of existing older structures. I'd like to make a few comments regarding this aspect of the variance issue. While tonight's vote does not deal with the issue of historic preservation, I feel that this issue is intimately tied with the debate over the requested variance. As we are all aware, the First Presbyterian Church has been continually expanding over the years, raising old historic houses and replacing them with parking lots and more recent structures. In addition, there's been an increase in the rate of such activity at the hands of other developers who have been raising older buildings, especially along Green Street, as they expand west from Lincoln Avenue towards downtown Urbana. Recently, homeowners and residents in the area, myself included, have begun to take notice of this unbridled development and are concerned that it threatens the remaining unique historic context of our neighborhood. Yet it seems that whenever we speak up and express our concerns regarding the constant loss of such structures to development, our words fall on deaf ears and the older buildings are inevitably sacrificed. I don't understand why there is such resistance to preserving old historic structures in this town, structures that link our city with its unique historic past. 2 weeks ago, I sat in disbelief as a city council member stated that the remaining older structures in the MOR district are not worth preserving because such buildings were not intended to survive more than about 100 years. I would argue that the quality of such buildings is often higher than that of structures built today, and with proper care and maintenance, such buildings can potentially last for several hundred years. Prime examples of such houses, many well over 100 years old, exist within the Moore District area. For example, the beautifully renovated Lindley House Bed and Breakfast, which was built in 1895, the Nathan Ricker House, built in 1892, and the unique Buena Vista Court, built around 1925. Beautiful surviving examples of 18th and 19th century homes similar to those in the Moore District can be found throughout the United States. Cities such as Boston, Philadelphia, Savannah, and New Orleans have hundreds of such structures, and tourists flock to these cities to enjoy them. Here in the Midwest, the city of St. Louis has been the site of several successful attempts to stop the gradual decay and destruction of historic neighborhoods. For example, the 19th century mansions of Lafayette Park were saved from extinction in the 1970s by the concerted effort of dedicated residents who refused to watch the buildings vanish from neglect. Leading this effort was Ruth Kamphoffner, a widow and mother of 5, who rescued and restored 6 houses and published a fascinating account of her experiences. And just show you that there is actually a publication on this. As a result of her dedication and that of others, Lafayette Park became the first historic district in St. Louis. In an apparent attempt to justify the continued demolition of older structures in the Moore District, the same City Council member I mentioned earlier stated that nobody expresses outrage with the University of Illinois as it demolishes older buildings as it constantly expands. However, such outrage has been expressed recently regarding the university's plan to acquire the 80-year-old Georgian apartment building by eminent domain and demolish it for a parking lot. This structure was recently designated a local historic landmark after a nomination by Urbana historic preservation consultant Alice Novak. So contrary to the views of some on City Council, outrage has been expressed about the university's role in the continued demolition of historic structures in Champaign-Urbana. Unfortunately for those of us in the Moore District, we feel there is a greater urgency to resolve such problems in our own neighborhood before it's too late. It just seems to be a never-ending struggle for us. If nothing else comes from this debate over the requested variance of the church, I hope that it will at least raise awareness of the plight of continued demolition of the old historic context of the Moore District and the early historic core of Urbana. Old structures are non-renewable resources. Once they're gone for good, together with the history they represent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Ilona Matkovsky, 412 West Elm, Presbyterian Church.
I will be very short. I would like to ask that the council uphold the regulations and recommendations that were laid down in the for the Moore District. So far, we haven't seen much evidence, as Brian before me said, of attempts to save historic buildings in Urbana, even though the regulations and rules are there. They are not used. The proposed expansion of the church will add a very large new addition to the existing church, which will basically replicate the same style and architectural design that the current church has, which stylistically is alien to this area. The addition of the small building as planned will basically be another small step in the erosion of the historic context and fabric of our neighborhood. As I discussed at the last meeting, a lot of these processes happen slowly but definitely, and unfortunately, as they are going on, we don't notice them. But there comes a point where the additive effect is so great that the historic context of the neighborhood is basically lost, and the loss is irreversible. I believe if the regulations and recommendations which have been put in writing should be upheld, and if they are upheld, we can put an end to this kind of deterioration. It is not a plea for or against the church itself or whatever they are doing, or the cooperation between the two churches. It is only a plea to please uphold the regulations that we have already. Thank you.
Any questions? All right. Next is Cindy Strelo, 907 South Anderson, on the variance for the Presbyterian Church.
Hadn't intended to speak, but I just can't help it now. I will say I'm on the Joint Building Committee, so I do have some knowledge of this project. Our church has been dismayed and embarrassed by our lack of communication with our neighbors in the past, and going to just bend over backwards to communicate with them in the future. I personally have a lot of sympathy with our owner-occupied immediate neighbors. And then lastly, I'll say, well, I don't know enough about zoning ordinances to speak to the issue of special circumstances. A lot of the other objections or support is based on speculation, We speculate that we're not going to grow very much. Everyone else speculates, well, how could you possibly not when you're tripling the size of the building? That's speculation. And I speculate that if this building is not allowed to be built, or even only a smaller one, our partners, the Korean Church of Champaign-Urbana, might decide that they have to sever from us. Nobody knows if they'll decide that, if we're not allowed to do this. But they might, and if they did, that would leave First Presbyterian, which is not growing, and it follows the pattern of most other Protestant churches like ours, not going to grow. And we have buildings that require a lot of upkeep, so it's unlikely that we would keep those lots, the empty lot and the 607 West Elm. I think it's unlikely we would keep those. We'd need money to support our buildings that we have now. So I'm speculating who would be there if not us. How much better would that be than us? So I'm done.
Any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of public input, unless I've missed anybody or if we have any latecomers. Any input from council members? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and dig right into the agenda then. The only item under new business is the ordinance approving a major variance to allow an increase in the maximum permitted floor area ratio from .7 to 1.19 at 608 West Green Street in the MOR Mixed Office Residential Zoning District, case number ZBA-04-MAJ-15. And this comes to us, so it's on the table, having been deferred from the February 21st meeting. Is there any additional staff report on this before we get started? Okay, no additional staff report, so the floor is open. The motion is on the floor.
There is a motion on the floor?
Yeah, it's been deferred. Now we're taking it off the table. Ms. Chenoweth?
I'd like to, if a motion is on the floor, I'd like to make an amendment to the motion. I move to amend the motion with the following, which I believe I've passed out to council members, and I think members of the media have also gotten it. Let's see, just to read through this. On page 2 of your ordinance, there's a whereas. It's kind of the final whereas. Basically, strike 1 and replace it with the special circumstances that the church is surrounded by a historic lot to the west. This refers to Ricker Lot and a potentially historic lot to the north, 607 West Elm. The specific lot for expansion is geographically located directly adjacent to the church on a main thoroughfare and serves as the most functional option for expansion of the church. The second would be to strike number 2, which is the issue about special privilege. And it would say instead the proposed variance is not a special privilege since most lots are not surrounded by historically designated and potentially historic properties. Then we skip, leave 3 as it is, and let's see here. Number 4, we would strike number 4 as written, and it's a little bit of a rewording, but it has some similar pieces. The FAR of the church annex as proposed will not alter the character of the neighborhood because it will not require additional parking. In addition, the visual mass of the proposed structure is similar to other structures in the MOR district in terms of mass. Furthermore, the design of the new addition has been reviewed with established guidelines to ensure aesthetic compatibility. That refers to the design review board, which it has gone through already. In addition, an additional piece of the amendment would be to add to the, is the motion on the floor, does that include the conditions that the zoning board of appeals? Okay, it does.
Yeah.
Okay. So in addition to those conditions, there would be 2 more conditions. One which comes from the church has already offered, which is that they establish a privacy barrier between their north parking lot and Buena Vista Court to reduce the intrusion of headlights and other commotion in their homes while the newly installed landscaping reaches maturity. And then the second condition is a condition that I worked on with our staff and legal, and that is that the church engage in joint planning with the city of Urbana concerning future expansion in the interest of, 1, regulating the intensity of use of this single structure, meaning the church structure in the neighborhood, 2, preserving the residential character and look of the neighborhood, which we've all talked about, including the church is interested in preserving, and 3, exploring historic designation of 607 West Elm. That's my motion.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? You want to speak to it, Ms.
Yeah, if I could just, thank you, if I could speak to the motion briefly. I've been trying to figure out a way to support this variance, and I've met with the neighbors and the church, and we've had multiple meetings. I've probably spent 20 hours in meetings in the last week, because I really think that their vision is compelling. I think that they've done a lot to try to reduce the impact on the neighborhood in terms of putting a piece of the structure below grade. At the same time, I'm concerned about 2 things, and those concerns have not gone away. One is the legal precedent we're setting in terms of what constitutes a special circumstance. And as written, the ordinance makes a special circumstance out of something being an institutional use, and also makes a special circumstance out of having below grade, having piece of the FAR be below grade. And I'm very concerned about those as legal precedents that we're setting in this neighborhood. Just second is my concern about intensity of use, and of course, as we've heard, there's speculation one way, there's speculation the other. Mr. Olson, their architect, stated before the Zoning Board of Appeals that the growth rate of the Korean Missions Church was greater than the First Presbyterian Church, and that the proposed addition would be a facility that the church could grow into, and that everything would be built now to accommodate future growth. Well, we all know that whenever you invest in a property, you have to accommodate future growth. You don't want to just build for what you need. And so it's very sensible that you would actually want to build something for future growth. At the same time, there is an issue of intensity of use in this mixed office residential neighborhood. So the issue, basically the first page deals with legal precedent, the striking and adding different language. The only special circumstance I could come up with talking to people is that they are in this interesting location that is, a main thoroughfare and next to a historic property and a potential historic property, and kind of hemmed in, so to speak. And so that seems to be a special circumstance. I think that being a church or being an institution or having below grade, just legally, I just can't see how those would be special circumstances. And of course, we can't consider the kind of use, the gender of the use, the race of the use, or any of that as part of special circumstance, just like we can't and should not prohibit people from moving in because it's an African-American owned business. We also can't consider the use, or it's a Walmart, or it's Korean church. We're not supposed to consider these kinds of things. So I think there's a very compelling mission before us, but in terms of special use, it doesn't apply here. In terms of intensity of use, this has been the biggest issue. I think that because there's not additional parking, I think that significantly limits the intensity of use in terms of this addition. I would not support it if it came along with additional parking at this time. I think the traffic situation is of concern enough in the neighborhood. In terms of intensity of use, one of the things, basically has been said, we're allowing an intensity of use that is only allowable in an industrial zone in terms of FAR. I mean, it's a large building. It's 10,000 square feet. To mitigate that, to allow for this variance, but to mitigate the intensity of use, I think that the best thing that we could achieve is some understanding between the city and the church that there would be a limit to future expansion. I met with the church and that was turned down, that they would not accept limits to future expansion. So in light of that, I had two, I guess, choices. One is to turn down the variance altogether, and the other was to support the variance with the condition that there be some joint planning with the city of Urbana. And by joint planning, I mean that if there's a master plan that's before the church, that the church would submit that to the city staff, that the city staff would determine whether or not there should be, a plan case, or a council would determine whether or not there should be a plan case in looking at this future expansion. I also think that as I talked to the pastor, it was clear that the conversation about this historic nature of 607 West Elm had just kind of emerged in our conversation, and that this seemed to be a new thing on the table. And so in the interest of allowing the church to explore that, and to explore that with the Historic Preservation Commission, and not necessarily allowing there to be time to explore that, I think that the language in this condition is appropriate. I do expect from this language that 607 West Elm would come before our Historic Preservation Commission, and that there would be a discussion about the merits of this particular property, and that our experts who serve on the Historic Preservation Commission could provide some input to the church about what kind of asset they have or don't have in terms of the 607 West Elm Street. So I think that this is probably the best way to move forward. It allows the church to expand significantly with a major variance on this property, and hopefully for us to work together in the future in terms of, hey, you have an intense use right here on Green Street, it's double the size of what's allowed. Is there some way in which we can work together to mitigate the effects on Elm Street, which is really where the residential character and the impact on the residential character comes into place? It's not on Green Street. So to me, this seems like a trade-off that makes sense, and that is in the best interest of the city. It's the best interest of the church, and that's what I was hoping to achieve with this amendment. I'd appreciate your support.
Any other discussion? Mr. Alex?
I have a question for Ms. Chenoweth. With regard to this joint planning and exploring historic designation of 607 West Elm, reading this, it's not clear to me what aspects of this are binding on anyone. I mean, to the extent that anyone who wants to do something that's not strictly within the letter of the various ordinances has to seek variances or special use permits or so forth. One could argue that there already are requirements binding on the church for any future expansion, that they seek necessary permits or variances or whatever. If they're trying to do anything that's not permitted by right. It doesn't say that 607 West Elm will be submitted for historic designation, or that the church is obligated to pursue that. And I'm not sure what one would be obligating the church to do by requiring joint planning. And I was wondering if you could speak more to what it is that you expect. I mean, this sounds nice, but what is it that you actually expect to have happen as a result of this amendment, as opposed to the variance without the amendment?
I spoke to staff about that today, because we have a history. There's precedent for us to request joint planning. I believe we did this with Carl Foundation Hospital. That was in the context of a development agreement. We have joint planning. It's actually very common with institutions that we do this. It's expanding institutions like the university and the hospitals. In the case of the development agreement with Carl, things were specified more clearly because Carl had intended to expand in the immediate future, and so the request was, in the case of Carl, to have regular updates. They had to produce a master plan. That master plan had to be submitted to the city, and they had to do regular updates. In talking to staff, the question was, if the church, I've heard from various people that they're they're planning on expanding, they're not planning on expanding, it's going to be 30 years, they don't know how long it's going to be. So I think that instead of nailing down a particular date by which a master plan should be submitted, it is my understanding, and certainly staff could speak to this as well, because they felt like they had significant direction with this, is that there would be no expansion without plans submitted to the city for discussion of the church, and that it wouldn't even though there may be something that is allowed by right, like the demolition of 607 West Elm or the acquisition and demolition of other houses on the block, the church would not actually, they would be agreeing, by agreeing to this variance, they would be agreeing to not participate, to not engage in any expansion without submitting plans to the city beforehand, before demolition permit was requested or whatnot. And I guess the ability for us to enforce this is if Ms. Tyler's office gets a request for demolition at 607 West Elm from the church, and there hasn't been any engagement in joint planning, it's my understanding that she would not provide that demolition permit until joint planning had occurred. It's also my understanding that she would, and that staff would work with the church to decide whether or not something needed to come before council. So in terms of historic designation, what I mean by that is that the church may not bring forward that particular property for historic designation, but they would not oppose discussion of historic designation before the Historic Preservation Commission. Basically, they would not stand in the way. They would have an understanding that that there's a reasonable expectation that we would pursue the merits of historic designation at 607 West Elm. I hope that responds to you. It's not incredibly clear because the clear version is not a version that was amenable to the church, and it was my understanding they would just not accept the variance. So,
I think I would like to ask if it would be appropriate, Dr. Tyler, to confirm or comment on that with regard to what beyond a desire to be aware of what's going on is implied by joint planning.
I think Ms. Chenoweth's discussion of how we would interpret this condition is accurate. You could clarify it by saying prior to requests of any additional permits or demolition activity, comma, the church shall engage, and that would clarify that. But I think it's pretty clear that if there's prior to any additional projects by the church in that vicinity, they would need to complete this process. We define the process at that time as appropriate given what they were proposing, and I think the expiration of the historic designation of 607 West Elm could start immediately through our commission. We could, do some research, ask our commission, our staff to do some research on the property, and a lot of these coming to our Historic Preservation Commission for advice is quite common, and that's one of their functions, and that's what we would look for them to do. So that's a piece that I think that we could proceed with at the earliest convenience, and the others I would tie to any future proposal of any sort by the church.
But maybe I'm not asking the question correctly. I guess to get to the point, I'm asking, what is it that the church, in the absence of this condition, would be permitted to do by right that they would not be permitted to do in the presence of this condition?
Anything that would involve building permits, any kind of change of use. Say they wanted to add like another daycare center or something of that sort. Any kind of construction project which would then fall within our MOR guidelines. Some of that's administrative, some of it's with the DRB. Demolition requests. It's possible there could be some public works types of requests that could fall under this.
I guess so.
It says concerning future expansion, and I think we could take a broad view of that.
Maybe if I could follow up with a statement. I guess I am uncomfortable with it because I believe it's a significant extension of what I see as the actual issue that's on the table here. And I understand the spirit of it is to look at expansion in the grand context, but I'm trying to take a narrow view of this as a zoning variance case.
If you recall the Urbana Assembly of God, where we had kind of piecemeal special use permits, at one point, you were on the Plan Commission, at one point we're like, guys, you got to do a master plan. You know, we don't want to keep looking at each little addition. So I think that and that was a special use permit, but I think the same would hold true of variance requests, that at some point, you need to give us the bigger picture. And I think that this is presented in that spirit, as well as, just trying to continue to operate as an institutional use in a largely residential neighborhood, and then the special sensitivity of the Ricker House, which of course we've gone to the Historic Preservation Commission on, but there's another potentially historic property as well in the north. So.
Thank you.
Any discussion, Ms. Pat?
Thank you. Ms. Heather, if you could stay, I want to clarify. My understanding of this, I don't know if this makes a difference, Mr. Alex, but my understanding of this language is that if we were to pass this, that the church would not be obligated to obtain any approvals from the city for actions that are now allowed by right, such as a demolition, but that the church would be required to inform the city of a plan. Am I understanding that right, or am I reading more into this than is there?
Usually when we do joint planning with institutions, we do look to the institution or the other entity to do the legwork, that we're not going to prepare site plans or this type of thing, but we want to be informed and to review and to bring those plans to the appropriate board or commission. So I think that would be our request in this case.
Let me give an example. Say a demolition. Right now, if I wanted to demolish my house, I just applied for a demolition permit, and you don't ask me what I'm going to do after I tear down the house, right?
Right.
Okay, because I just have a right as an owner to demolish it.
That's right.
And so likewise, without this condition, the church could apply for a demolition permit for 607 West Elm or for anything else it might require, and that with this in the agreement or in this ordinance, the church would have to present you, excuse me, with some proposal of what it was they were doing.
Right.
Excuse me, but you still could not deny the demolition permit based on you don't like what they were going to do, right? I mean, according to the language here, this is not trying to...
I think that's fair.
Okay. I don't know if it makes a difference.
Okay, Mr. Hayes?
Yeah, earlier, one of the gentlemen who gave public input used to be on the long-range strategic planning for the church. I'm going to paraphrase what I thought I heard. The question was put to him, do you think it would be a good idea to have joint planning with the city? And he said, yes, I think it'd be a good idea. The point I'm trying to make is that, if we go ahead and pass this ordinance, okay, it does not preclude the church from wanting to do something in the future. After May, 5 or 6 months down the road, it'll be a new council. So after this council is dissolved and you have new people on the council, then there's a possibility if you have some differences, then maybe, that would be the time to dissolve some of them. But meanwhile, what this does, it helps the community and the church and the council stay more intact with each other so that we each have an idea of what's going on. I think that's basically what we got here. So there's no need to, in my opinion, make a mountain out of a molehill when the only thing council wants is closer coordination with the church, and the church wants to build that building at this time. But it does not preclude the church from taking other kinds of action in the future. That's just the way I see it.
Okay, any other discussion? Ms. Wyman, did you have?
Just discussion on this amendment to the main motion. I plan to support the amendment, changing what the current language is to this proposed amendment. One of the main things that I think Dr. Tyler pointed out, or that was pointed out in discussion, is that this provides more notice to the residents, notice to the city of what the plans are, but it doesn't allow the city or the residents to be able to say, to be able to stop this. It just gives more notice, and the upside on that is that sometimes through action, through communications, through protests of various sorts, people are able to make changes and create and provide more dialogue that would provide alternative routes of what's being proposed, but it doesn't mandate those changes or say that there has to be permission in order to do those things that, as Ms. Pat pointed out, are permitted by right currently. I think this addresses, I don't see any problem with addressing these issues that are in items 1, 2, and 4. And so I think that those replacements are fine. I have concerns that are dealt with more on the final vote, and I'll wait to bring that up after we vote on substituting Ms. Chenoweth's motion or proposal with the main motion. Thank you.
Further discussion? Yes, Ms. Chenoweth?
I have a question for Dr. Tyler, so it's convenient you came back. Your response to Ms. Pat's question, which is essentially what Ms. Wyman said, we have some prior notice. It's not necessarily the case that we can prohibit something, but my question to you is, if you received a demolition permit for 607 West Elm and you hadn't received a master plan for this, for the church, or had any dialogue, you could suspend your, you could hold off on giving out a demolition permit while you asked for a master plan, went through appropriate bodies, etc. So I think that the issue here is that there's a way to, the ideal situation is that we work together. And what I've heard from the church over and over and over again since this started is, we want to work with you. We want to work with the neighborhood. We want to be good neighbors. We want to preserve the residential character. We're going to put it underground. We're going to make a really nice structure with slate roof and all of these things. And so I think a piece of what I'm doing here is trusting the church, which it appears is my only option here, other than saying no. I would prefer to trust the church and say, I'm looking at you right now, and you're saying you want to cooperate with the neighborhood. If you really mean it, what that means is that you'll come to the city, you'll bring master plans to the city, you'll work with us, we'll look at if it is the case that you have a historic asset that's actually worth a lot more money than you think it's worth, that is worth a lot more historical value than you think it's worth, I assume that you would be interested in knowing that from our Historic Preservation Commission, and that you would want to take appropriate action to consider using that building for church uses rather than demolish it, to incorporate it in future expansion, etc. If I'm wrong, then we're just wasting our breath here, and we should just vote this down. So my question to Dr. Tyler is it the case that you could hold off on issuing a demolition permit until you saw evidence of joint planning? It's not necessarily that you'd be able to turn down a demolition permit, but you could delay the demolition permit while you work with the church to have joint planning.
I think it would be helpful to clarify that by adding a clause to the beginning of the amendment to state that prior to undertaking any additional construction activity or construction or demolition activity, the church shall engage. And that would just provide that clarification in the future that those activities would trigger, have they fulfilled the rest of this condition.
I would take that as a friendly amendment. I'd like to add it as a friendly amendment that prior to any building or demolition activity, including the request of any permits or demolition permits, the church engage, et cetera, et cetera. The church shall engage.
The two other points, and I know that you mentioned the single structure, i.e. the church, if that could be included, i.e. the church, because there was some confusion about whether that meant the addition.
Oh, okay.
And then also, Mr. Mason and Mr. Olson have informed me during the meeting, and not able to be recognized right now, but they do support these amendments. So I think Ms. Wyman said there was concern that they weren't in support, and they have said that they would be willing to abide by these amendments. So I'm just passing that along as a
That's
messenger.
useful, because that's different than the email I got today, so I appreciate that.
Maybe they've thought about it more, understood it better.
Okay.
Mr. Whalen?
In keeping with the spirit of what Ms. Chenoweth is promoting here, I just would like to say I received a letter from a citizen, and I'd like to read just a short part of it, if you'll grant me the time. And it says, "Permit me to give you my brief perspective on the organization, which is the First Presbyterian Church of Urbana, and its commitment to the community. I have been an Urbana resident and a member of this church for 27 years. Several years ago, the church considered moving outside the city limits. We rejected this idea and instead committed to staying in central Urbana and continuing to be involved in the community." And this is the part that is more in touch with what Ms. Chenoweth has been saying. "We are heavily involved in many aspects of Urbana life, especially those less fortunate and those of other races and cultures. We are not a rich church, but every year we take 25% off the top of our annual budget and give it to others, internationally, nationally, and locally. Our local efforts have recently included support for Francis Nelson Health Center, RLCC, an interracial religious leaders group, the Reading Group, the Crisis Nursery, the Eastern Illinois Food Bank, Times Center, Catholic Worker House, a Women's Fund, Center for Women in Transition, a Refugee Center, Safe House, Empty Tomb, a local food pantry for emergency use, and the Helen Stevick Senior Citizen Center. A couple of years ago, we co-sponsored the Urbana Habitat for Humanity House. Our members don't just give money to worthy causes, they volunteer their time in large amounts to better the community. This is a valued," now I'm finished reading, "this is a valued citizen in our community. They've shown their interest and willingness to contribute. They've shown their proof of their intentions by their good works. I see no reason to deny them the variance, and I support Ms. Chenoweth's amendment."
Okay, any other discussion? This is on the amendment to the main motion. There's no further discussion.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Sorry, one more comment. I'm starting to be convinced. I think the thing I like about the amendment is the clarification of the special circumstances. I think what I've always seen as the special circumstances here is that this is an expansion of an existing long-standing use. This is not deciding where to locate this church in the neighborhood. This is expanding an existing use. But the geographic factors that led to the request for the variance are, in fact, that it is effectively limited in terms of the directions in which it can expand based on these surrounding properties. So I think the special circumstance language is probably superior to what was in the original motion. I'll make my comment about FAR if and when we consider the main motion. I am generally opposed to the notion of sort of doing these in this one paragraph about joint planning. I think one could write an entire development agreement about this, which would make it very clear what the rights and responsibilities of the city were and the rights and responsibilities of the church. And obviously it's not going to happen here. And I guess I am mildly opposed to the notion of requiring vague commitments without specifying what they are. But to to the extent that I don't think this amendment obligates the church to do much more than communicate with the city about long-term intentions. And I would hope that it is the intent that this is not a restriction on what can be done by right, as I think Ms. Pat implied in the record. Then I would be willing to support this amendment based on the notion that clearly perhaps better communication between the church and the city and propagation of that information to the neighborhood earlier might have reduced the degree to which the city's already spent a lot of effort on this particular variance, which, as I'll speak to when we get to the main motion, I think is a relatively limited question. So I will reluctantly support this if
there further discussion, Mr. Roberts?
I've listened to a lot of the discussion, and I think I was having a feeling that I would like to find some basis for supporting the church's growth without what I would expect to be the ultimate destruction of the rest of the block, because it was hard to imagine how the other homes, which were already purchased and owned by the church as gifts, which I didn't realize, but it doesn't matter, were obviously the closely associated to the current church structures and would undoubtedly come under the gun of the eye of the future church expansion, say in 10, 15 years or 20 years. I mean, there's no doubt that that would be the next thing that people would consider doing. And it's only really those old homes along Elm Street that facilitate any kind of vision, and it's almost a mirage or a facade for the existence of a neighborhood quality feeling on Elm Street. On the Green Street side, you have a behemoth-sized building next to small eggs along the rest of the street. It's like having a cantaloupe in the middle of an egg carton. And you have only the older homes on Elm Street, which, if you're on that street, they make an effective screen, which kind of limits the effect of the growth of the church, even though it's maybe a chimera of reality. It still at least provides a sense that you are on a block where evenly proportioned buildings exist. And I have some concern that the 607 Elm Street building, however old it might be, since it already has undergone, I understand, extensive renovation to make it the offices of the Korean Church at this time, may have perhaps been altered enough where the historic nature of it, or the it qualifying as a historic house on the block, may be in jeopardy. So there's no real guarantee that that building can be, we don't know what the fate of that building is going to be. But I feel like these conditions, even though they may be somewhat vague, allow at least a process which can be set in place before another house suddenly is demolished, and then it's brought to the attention of council that a great plan has come to the knowledge of those in the church that this space could be suddenly renovated and made into another wonderful hall or facility. So I support this amendment, and I think it's a very vital one. And even though I have great significant doubts, perhaps, about the whole process and what it means for the neighborhood, if there's any safeguard at all, I think they're being provided. And I would almost love to see the offerings which Don Mason has indicated in his 10-bullet letter to us, where he is offering to continue a landscape committee and negotiate with Buena Vista Court and maintain street parking instruction for his new parishioners or whatever, could be somehow included in this document or as an addendum or something. And I don't know how that can be done, but I think it's important that, that at least these efforts have been extended to the community. And so seeing that the church is offering a significant change in attitude from 3 weeks ago, I would support this.
Okay, any other discussion? Mr. Chairman, just to get the wording on this, since we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants there for a minute, the wording we came up with is prior to obtaining any additional construction or demolition permits, comma, the church shall engage in joint planning with the City of Urbana concerning future expansion in the interests of regulating the intensity of use of this single structure, parentheses, the church, in the neighborhood, comma, preserving the residential character and look in the neighborhood and exploring historic designation of 607 West Elm. Is that what everybody was understanding the motion to be?
That's correct, as long as, if I could speak to that.
Yeah.
Just the, I assume additional permits mean permits after the permitting of this particular, so
Right.
it's understood that anything in addition to this particular expansion would be considered an additional permit, and then that's fine.
Anything outside of this?
Yeah, outside of
particular
this, that's correct. And thank you for the clarification, I think that helps us know what we're voting on.
Okay, any other discussion on this amendment? There's no other discussion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Now we're back to the main motion for the major variance for the Presbyterian Church. Any discussion on that? Mr. Alex?
I made a comment at the last meeting that I did not think deferral was in order, and so in keeping with that, I'll not change my, I think the facts of the situation haven't changed. I think the amendment that was proposed is a significant change. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about that, but the way I've always looked at this is that there was in fact a special circumstance, which is that this is expansion of existing use on in an area where there are limited opportunities in terms of the direction in which that expansion could take place. I may differ with Dr. Tyler on this. My opinions with regard to the intent of the floor area ratio requirement in the MOR district are based on the discussions that took place when this was addressed at the Plan Commission, this being the MOR guidelines and the FAR adjustment in the MOR. And those discussions focused almost entirely, if I remember correctly, on massing and on visual impact. And so based on that and based on the lack of correlation in the ordinance between floor area ratio requirements and class of use, it is my assumption that the floor area ratio is intended to be used primarily to regulate the visual impact of the building. Consequently, I think the solution that has been proposed is appropriate. I am not terribly concerned about setting a precedent by recognizing that part of the reason why I am supporting this variance is because the visual impact is mitigated by the fact that some of the space is on the lower level. I do think that if the zoning ordinance FAR requirement is intended to be a method of regulating intensity of use, that is something that needs to be explicit in the zoning ordinance so that future councils can have more guidance in terms of how they're supposed to interpret this. As I've said, I'm interpreting it as primarily a visual impact provision. If indeed more is intended, then that should be probably looked at as a change to the ordinance. I don't feel that by approving this variance, we're significantly increasing the amount of activity or the substantive impact of this on the surrounding neighborhood, and so I am in favor of this variance. I did want to make one more comment related to an issue that I don't think is directly related to this, seeing as how the historic structure that is being built over is already gone, but that's a point that Mr. Adams and Ms. Metkovsky raised about whether the city is doing a good job at preserving structures, especially potentially historic structures in the MOR district. I think this is a very difficult problem, and I'm sure you know this and have probably followed some of the efforts to reform the MOR district ordinance to try to do this. To a large extent, the city works at cross purposes in this district. We don't want parking clogging the streets, so we require parking which induces people to tear down houses and build parking lots. We have building codes and requirements for buildings to be occupied, which can lead to condemnation of buildings and can lead to structures becoming obsolete. These codes are there for very good reasons, but again, it's a situation where if these buildings are not maintained adequately, at some point the city is probably the instrument by which these buildings become declared uninhabitable. And the biggest issue is very difficult without financial incentives at a level beyond which we have the resources to provide to keep a property owner from allowing property to decay or to deteriorate to the point that they believe it is most economically viable to take down that building. I think in the example that Mr. Adams raised, and I think there's some other excellent examples where people have purchased historic structures, and there's some examples in this community of such, where people have purchased historic structures and really turned them from blights into assets to the neighborhood. And I think, ultimately, although there are things that the city can do, and I hope that those of you who are involved in trying to support historic preservation in this neighborhood will make sure you communicate to the city whatever it is you think that we can be doing better to try to do this. Ultimately, the responsibility for preservation of these structures and the best means for preserving these structures rests with private individuals or institutions who are going to buy these properties and rehabilitate them and use them. And so I think we need to be looking at, rather than what is the city doing to prevent people from tearing down these buildings, there's in fact very little we can do within the law to do that. What we can do is try to create a climate of economic opportunity and so on where it is worth more to purchase these properties and rehabilitate them than it is to tear them down. And that's what the MOR district is intended to support. And I think that if there are, we've already revised this ordinance significantly once, and if there are things that we need to do to create a climate in which it is favorable not to tear these buildings down, then I would hope that anyone who has ideas will communicate those to the city, because I do feel, that is a key component of this MOR district and something that we ought to all be in favor of. In case you forgot what I was talking about, I am intending to support this variance.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Alex. Any other discussion on the main motion of the variance? Yes, Ms. Wyman.
I appreciate I've gotten a lot of emails and phone calls, and got to talk with a lot of church supporters and a lot of residents and neighbors, and even got to talk with some on the street over the last several weeks to discuss this issue, and I feel like I'm very well informed on it. I do have to say a few things. One is, out of all of the constituents that have contacted me, those who live in the current Ward 2, there is unanimous opposition to this proposal. And those are of the people who live in the ward and obviously are most directly affected because of their residence. And I think all of the people who contacted me are owner-occupied resident, or own their residence, are opposed to this. I was still looking for an opportunity or a way to be able to support this. And some of that obviously is from a personal bias of having attended Presbyterian church when I was younger. But it's also just because there are so many great things that the church members have talked about the Presbyterian and the Korean church. And I think that what the churches have done together are really wonderful and to be commended. I got a few personal handwritten letters as well, and I thought, wow, if this was a fundraising letter, I'd send a check. It was the churches have done wonderful things, and I think that's to be commended. But I think it's important to recognize and note that the council is not to and should not be deciding a variance request based on the good that a religious institution, or in other cases that a business or an organization or even an individual does. When someone asks for a variance, it's supposed to be based on what the law says, and not based on this prejudice, this bias that we as individual lawmakers have in support or in opposition to those who, or the causes that those requesting the variance are asking for. I also think it's important to note that the discussions that we've talked about that aren't directly related to this variance. I think the fence for the church and some of these agreements to continue to talk together and those sorts of things, I think it's not appropriate really to talk about that or to use that as a reason why we want to vote in favor or against, actually, a variance request. I think it's great that the church is going to continue to, or is going to be working with the neighbors, and I think it's great that the neighbors are working with the church. But regardless of whether how this vote goes, that's something that should be ongoing, and a promise to continue to work or to start to work with others, I think, is not something that should then the council should just say, oh, well then, of course we should do it because the church has promised this. I think that unless it's in the documentation that we pass in the law or the ordinance, the variance that we pass, it's not really appropriate for council to then condition or to approve of a variance because of an oral promise to make these changes or to start to take some action. I will be voting no on this proposed variance for several different reasons. I think that it's important to note, as Dr. Ryan noted when she spoke, that rejecting the proposal by the church doesn't mean that we're rejecting any sort of expansion. In fact, the expansion that would be allowed without council approval is nearly double the size of what the building that the churches tore down. They'd still be allowed 5,950 square feet in expansion. That's approximately twice the size that was previously used, rather than the 3 times the proposed usage that is being proposed by this variance. I also think it's important to note what our zoning ordinance says, and that is with regard to the mixed office residential district that the church is in, and that is that the MOR, the mixed office residential district, and I'm just reading from the zoning ordinance, or the zoning ordinance at this point, is intended to provide areas for a limited variety of business, office, and residential land uses in proximity to low-density residential dwellings in order to promote the economic viability and preservation of older residential structures while protecting the aesthetic and residential character of the area. The description goes on to state that this district is intended to encourage the adaptive reuse of these older residential structures as an incentive to preserve and extend the useful life of such structures while also allowing compatible new development. The MOR is also intended to promote the conservation of buildings and neighborhoods which in combination or individually are of unique community and neighborhood significance. There was discussion and mention of certainly the Buena Vista Court residents who are strongly opposed to this change. And while the actual buildings, houses that the residents live in at Buena Vista Court, those houses are not being demolished. Certainly their quality of life is being severely impacted. That's why they've been coming out for hours and hours and meetings in opposition to this, because it's the character of their residential neighborhood that is so directly impacted by the increase that we will see in traffic and in use by an increase in the FAR that is 3 times what the former use is, and again, more than what is allowed under the MOR allowances. One other thing I want to point out just before I yield the floor, and that is on page 81 of our zoning ordinance, where it talks about the development regulations by district. The MOR allowance for floor area ratio, that is a 0.7 in the MOR, is higher than what's allowed under R1, under R2, under R3, under R4, even under B1. So it's not like that the structures, the houses, the churches in the MOR district are so restricted by our laws. In fact, the MOR district, those structures actually have a much greater FAR that they're allowed than those that are allowed if, again, they're in the R1, R2, R3, R4, or B1 zoning districts. I appreciate the changes that Ms. Chenoweth made. I think that if this is going to pass, that this makes it better. But I still think that that this isn't compatible with the MOR, with the residential neighbors, and that if we were to reject this, that it would not be rejecting the church from being able to expand. In fact, they would still be able to expand, and I think that's an important something important to note in this vote, regardless of how it ends up. Thank you.
Further discussion on the main motion? If there's no further discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alex?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Ms. Pat?
No.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
No.
Motion carries with 5 ayes. I've had
Is ordinance number 2005-02-026, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute an agreement with the City of Champaign and the University of Illinois respecting floodplain remapping of the Boneyard Creek, Amendment Number 1 from Public Works. We heard from Mr. Gray on this at the committee meeting, and this was forwarded to the council with a recommendation for approval. I move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? If there's no discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alex?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Ms. Pat?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
Okay, that motion carries with 7 ayes. Mr. Alex?
Next, we have ordinance number 2005-02-027R, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute a lease with Carl Reisman, 212 West Green, the Morrow Building, from legal. This was forwarded to council with no recommendation.
Well, since we didn't get to this last week and it was forwarded without a recommendation, Mr. Paletti will give a brief staff report.
It'll be very brief, you're right. The city was put in the position of renting this space out because of the three-party agreement with the Urbana Free Library Board and the foundation and the city that you're all familiar with. We placed an ad in the paper. We have a very interested tenant, anxious tenant, I should say. We negotiated a lease, a copy of which is attached. The fiscal impact is we regain our initial investment, which is about $75,000 in principal, which was the acquisition of the building, another $25,000 in improvements. It's repaid in a little less than 12 years, actually, assuming a 5% rate of return. The nice thing about this is this particular tenant represents no change of use, so we have a minimal amount of improvements to make on the inside. They're primarily redecorating some exterior maintenance things, but no significant code obstacles or expenses as a result.
Okay, any questions, Ms. Chenoweth?
What are the, you said that we're doing, since we acquired the building, we're doing $25,000 in improvements, is that correct?
That's a rough estimate, but yeah.
And so, could you just list briefly what the improvements will be in addition to the redecorating, what the exterior improvements are?
Yeah, the roof and some side improvements are probably the biggest individually significant items. In addition to that, we're doing some minor remodeling on the inside with regard to the bathroom that's in there and a little coffee station area. The redecorating is actually the responsibility of the tenant, the painting, carpet replacement, and things like that. But the things that we're spending money on will be the exterior of the building, some window repair and door repair. We poured a ramp, an accessibility ramp at the front door. And then, like I said, we'll be tearing off the roof and redoing it.
Are there improvements to the parking lot area in front, or is that not?
Not improvements per se, in terms of changing the pavement to say we're going to stripe it and then put up signage.
Okay. My only other question is it true, I guess this is to the mayor or Mr. Walden, that is it true that a lease would not have to go to council if it was less than 3 years? It's coming to us because it's a 3-year lease?
I believe it has to.
That's true.
That's true?
Mm-hmm.
That's true, okay. So, final question is, did we have anyone who responded to our ad in the paper that wanted to do any kind of retail whatsoever in this space?
No.
We did have some interest, but, no more than just talking about it and saying that'd be a good idea. Nobody ever put pen to paper and crunch the numbers to find out what kind of an investment it would take to, put in a coffee shop or some kind of retail. Any food service related business would require a lot of more investment than what we're doing with this to bring it up to the health and safety standards.
Okay.
So some passing interest, but no serious interest, let's put it that way. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Alex?
Would move approval.
Second.
Motion and second, any discussion?
Yes, I'd like to make amendment to the motion, which is to strike number 18 in the lease. And that section is basically the automatic renew option. So I have a motion, there's a motion, could I speak to that?
You want to speak to your amendment? Yeah.
That's correct. The reason that I would like to strike 18 is because I've spoken to at least one business owner in town and have pursued others to the possibility of doing some kind of retail, compatible use retail like a coffee shop or a bookstore, boutique near the library, and they are quite interested in this. It's just a matter of, I think that we need the income right now. It's not a significant change in use, and we should try to tenant the building as soon as possible for financial reasons. On the other hand, the idea of having it kind of be an option to automatically renew in the lease puts us into a situation where if we do have someone or someones who would be interested in pursuing a more compatible retail use than, say, just a lawyer office use next to the library, we don't really have the option to try to pursue that as a city. So I would like us to have the option after the end of the 3 years to consider a different kind of use that would be an amenity instead of just a kind of zero-sum game. It would be an amenity to the library. And so in that way, I don't want to bind the hands of a new council in terms of automatic renewals of leases, et cetera.
Any other discussion? Yes, Ms. Wyman?
I'm just wondering if either Ms. Chenoweth, or if she doesn't have an answer, then perhaps Mr. Pioletti would answer if they've spoken with the lessee, whether he's interested in, I guess, what his intention is as far as if he intends to only keep it for 3 years, because it looks like it's just a one-way, that under this proposal or under this lease, the lessor or the city doesn't have the right to terminate or to end the 3-year contract, the 3-year lease. And I just don't know if you spoke with Mr. Reisman about
No, I
this?
did not get an opportunity to do that.
Okay. Mr. Pioletti, did you speak?
I can tell you that when we first started negotiating the lease, we were talking about a 5-year term. We settled on a 3-year term. He frankly wanted less. We wanted a little bit more, so we had a better opportunity to regain our investment. So the longer term worked out better for us fiscally. So 3 was a compromise position, and that's what came to you. The issue with the automatic renewal, frankly, we're more concerned with the escalators and what the rate would grow to. The term certainly of that renewal could be negotiated again. And that's where, in my negotiations with Mr. Reisman, that's where we left it, that when we got to the conclusion of the 3-year period, that we may or may not invoke the automatic renewal and escalator. We may, in fact, negotiate a new lease.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Alex?
I would, I guess, not want to deprive the lessee of that 3-year option without their agreement, based on the fact that obviously they're going to be committing money to the fit up of this space, and they'd want to presumably have as long a period of time as they could at their option to recover that investment. So I think if the parties were amenable to it, it might be fine to have it be a 3-year closed-end lease, but I wouldn't want to, I'm not sure it'd be appropriate to make that change without a bilateral understanding between the city and the other party.
Chenoweth?
It's my understanding that if the terms of the lease are not agreeable, that a new lease could be drafted and brought to us. It just doesn't go through a lengthy process of having to go through commissions or whatnot before it comes to us. So I think that, honestly, I considered just voting no to it or tabling it until we were able to look into it, but I simply because I just feel like the city has an asset in its hands. The asset sits right next to one of the most trafficked areas in downtown. It is an ideal location for retail. We have a quality of life problem in Urbana in that we don't have basic goods and services within walking distance. This is an ideal location for that. I've talked to people who are interested in doing, going through whatever RFP process it is and submitting proposals to do something in this location. It would require the city to do more than just build a ramp in the front. So I think that has been one of the concerns. So I think that honestly, I'm disappointed because I feel like we could do so much more with this property, and we're just not beginning to look at the options there. At the same time, I don't want to stand in the way of $950 of rent per month starting now, particularly because I think it will take at least a year, if not 2, and I'm fine with 3 to put something together for this property. So I'd like us to not tie our hands with any kind of automatic renewals and look to see if we can actually have a better use of this property in the future.
So you're proposing that we remove the 3-year, make it a 3-year closed-end lease basically, and then see if the lessor still will go for it?
Yeah, I think that's probably the better course of action right now, since we've advertised in the paper, we've started this process. Why don't we, if it's the consensus of the council to make it a 3-year closed-end term, let's do that now. And then we'll speak with the lessee, and if it's unacceptable, we'll bring something else back. If it is acceptable, then there's a timing issue here in terms of fit-up. Then he can proceed with the fit-up of the building. So my recommendation is, if that's the consensus of the council, which I personally don't have a problem with, why don't we approve it, and then if we have to pass something else, we'll do it at a later time.
I know as somebody that's entered into leases myself for business purposes in the past, that having the option is a very attractive component of a lease, because you do spend time moving. He's spending time moving out of his existing office, fixing up the interior of the space, which is his responsibility. You have clientele, customers that are used to your business location there, and so to then change the lease on them at the last second and say, oh, by the way, at the end of 3 years, we're going to put out an RFP and try to get a coffee shop here, and if we do, we're going to kick you out, is not entering into a lease in good faith in my mind. And so this is, if that's what we wanted to do, then in the advertising process earlier, we should have said we want to put out we're not just advertising this lease or this space for lease. We want to have an RFP process and try to get a retail coffee shop in here. I think the time has passed for that particular option, at least in the very near future. And I would say even with a 3-year renewal, that's not an unreasonable expectation for a leasee to have in a lease, unless, of course, they break the terms of the lease in some other way. So I would recommend keeping it in there, and unless the tenant, Mr. Reisman, is agreeable to taking it out, but I can't imagine that he would be if he's got it in there right now. Ms. Chenoweth?
Well, just one thing, it sounds like he actually wanted a shorter lease, not a longer lease, so he may be amenable to it. And second, I don't think I could have been more clear during our conversations about the library and the library block and the master plan. I don't think I could be more clear in my conversations with the mayor privately, where I asked, what's going into this location? Is there any way we could get a coffee shop? I feel like I've been speaking about this idea for quite a long time at this point, and then I basically had given up when I saw that it was going to be an attorney, and you said it was going to be an attorney, and so that's the way it was. And then I actually get calls from people who said that they responded to the ad in the paper and they wanted to do a coffee shop and they were interested in it and they would pay the money for the kitchen. It's just that they would need something that's they would need to know that they could be there longer than 10 years. And so I thought, we're not actually looking at all our options here. And so I think that I made my thoughts about this known a long time ago, and they just were not taken into consideration. And the ad that was put in the paper did not reflect our conversations about the master plan, which were specifically to talk about an appropriate use for this location that was hopefully something retail or commercial that would service the clientele of the library. So I would ask people to support this because I think it ties our hands and it ties the hands of a future council, and we have real opportunities to provide something at this high-trafficked corner for quality of life improvements in Urbana. And we could do that in 3 years, and we would provide this office space until then.
Well, Mr. Alex?
No, there's a couple of hands up there.
Pat?
Thank you. I don't see any harm in asking Mr. Reisman if he would agree to a 3-year fixed term. If he won't, I think the point that the mayor raised about how much money he's putting into this, I mean, if that's his reason, if he says, well, if I'm going to put all this money, I want this place for more than 3 years, I don't think that would be unreasonable of him. But if he was not interested in a 5-year lease, then that, he might be agreeable to this, and he's an individual who shares our interest in the vitality of downtown is concerned about the interests of the city as well. And it really just depends on what his personal circumstances are, and I don't know what they are, so I don't see any harm in asking. And if he says no, well, then that's going to be reported back to us. Like, do we want to lease this to this guy or not?
Yeah, I think it makes sense what Ms. Chenoweth is proposing. Neither side has signed the lease, and so there, I guess, are a couple different ways we could go about this. I think this makes the most sense. We amend this proposed lease. Mr. Walden has a chance to talk with the potential lessee to find out if he's agreeable to that. If so, he'll sign it, city will sign it, that's it. I guess the other things that we could do is defer this for 2 weeks, and then Mr. Walden could also talk with with the lessee and ask if he's amenable to it, would still come back. Or we could, I suppose those are two options. It seems either way. If we pass Ms. Chenoweth's amendment to take out Section 18, it probably would get signed faster or sooner rather than later, as opposed to if we were to defer this just to wait for for the response from the potential lessee. So I think it makes sense, and I think that if this is for a 3-year, then we should go ahead and just do it for the 3 years. It doesn't preclude Mr. Reisman or any other person from asking for 3 years at the end of the first 3-year term, but I think it provides the other opportunities that certainly all members of our community were aware of as far as the interests of developing other potential uses for the library block.
Mr. Mayor, we recognize Mr. Walden.
Pat's going to call Mr. Reisman and ask him, why don't we bump this back on the agenda a little bit and see where we are?
We take this up later in this meeting, perhaps after the
normally we wouldn't do that, but I know that there's pressure to get in there this week, and so and to pull the trigger on certain improvements there. So I think timing is an issue. So if we could find out from the lessee what he wants to do tonight, maybe we could wrap it up.
Well, if we want to, a motion would be in order then to table this until time later in the meeting when we have a little bit more information.
I move to postpone consideration until the end of the agenda.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those?
I just was conscious that I walked past the offices a couple of weeks ago and I saw him and his son painting already, so I'm sure he's interested in the building.
Okay. Okay, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Next, we have ordinance number 2005-02-028, an ordinance formalizing city parking lot designations, code sections 23-195 and 23-25, and Schedule R from legal, which we forwarded again with no recommendation. And Mr. Wald, despite clarification, it's my understanding from looking at this that item C on the agenda deals only with how the lots are referred to, as opposed to introducing any new parking restrictions?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Bruce, do you want to present this?
As Mr. Alex mentioned, we were trying to clarify the new Schedule R, what the actual designations are in terms of the city code for these lots. In terms of the actual amendments to the provisions in the code, what you have are some, and I apologize for this, but we were working on this today, and that is some possible amendments to resolve some of the issues that have come up over the weekend regarding hours, a little more clarity in terms of hours of availability of weekends and evenings. That is much clearer in this new draft. Let me just begin by saying, in terms of the parking status and rights for this, this action is necessary to complete our obligations under the development agreement that was approved. And you see the sections in here which obligate the city. That's something that we've approved. So this is something that we're doing to fulfill that contract. As you know, in terms of parking, that parking is a pretty valuable commodity. Some of the I was looking back at Lot 10E North and recalling that I paid as much as $50 a square foot for that property. So, parking is a pretty valuable commodity. Somebody's got to pay for it. In this case, Lincoln Square is paying for the parking in all of these by agreement with the city, and that's a substantial contract and in excess of $100,000 a year for this parking. There are no property rights or interests with others in these parking lots at Lincoln Square. There are no property rights interests to the Methodist Church. There are no property right interests to Barry Weiner. There are no property rights, if you look at the title, other than the City of Urbana, the lessee, which is Lincoln Square, and a surface easement that runs until 2066 to Lincoln Square and Jumers. So, just to set the table, that's where we are. Now, having said that, and that lease for Lincoln Square runs to 2030. Initially entered in 1966. So there's the table in terms of what the legal obligations are. Having said that, I was listening to the testimony earlier tonight, and I actually think that most of the problems that we're discussing are resolved. I think it's a good idea to talk about it a little bit more before these are approved, but the 3 spaces that were discussed at the south of the building will be preserved in this agreement. The 7 spaces that the city provides for free to the Methodist Church for staff parking is preserved in the agreement. Lot 10E North, I know there's a lot of confusion about that, but I just counted up the spaces on Lot 10E North, and there are actually 45 spaces in 10E North, which would be available for 2-hour parking. So there's a substantial number of parking spaces in the 2-hour provision. It's not just the area between the church and Lincoln Square. That was the old designation. The new designation includes the first aisle on both sides of a double-loaded aisle in the area just south of that parking lot. So probably a little bit of confusion about that. So there are quite a few more spaces available for 2-hour parking. What's not addressed and is not addressed for anyone, whether it's edge of mall or other uses surrounding Lincoln Square or Barry Weiner or any of the others, is that there is no free employee parking. Employee parking is, as it is everywhere, you have to pay for it. So to the extent that, we can resolve all these problems with customer parking, the spaces that are reserved, the drop-off, the 7 spaces on the east of the church and the 3 spaces in front, we're fine. As far as, can we just give parking spaces away for other employees? That's prohibited by that lease. So there's where we are. Now, the revisions to this agreement specify, if you look on page 4, I think first underlined section, page 4, that 10A South, 10A North, and 10F is restricted during the hours of 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., Mondays through Fridays. Again, we're trying to make it clear where the employee parking is to be located, and that those lots are available on weekends and after 6 p.m. on weekdays. So that doesn't change. We've tried to throw some language in here, but I think we need a week or 2 weeks to revise it. That was, for the purposes of this subparagraph, patrons of the daycare center are allowed to have, are treated as commercial tenants of Lincoln Square. We probably need to revise that in some way to include daycare center and patrons of the church or something like that. So I would like to have a couple weeks to work on that, solve that problem. Otherwise, I don't see any further problems with it.
So what you're suggesting is that we
I
put this
think
off
that-
for a couple of weeks?
I think we're there with the exception of that provision, unless someone else has another comment.
Are there any questions? Ms. Pat?
Thank you. Just looking at this quickly, I think I'd be glad you could take 2 more weeks. And one thing to just think about is if the intent and if it's agreeable to Lincoln Squares or what's it called? Lincoln
Lincoln Square Village.
Yeah, Lincoln Square Village. If it's agreeable to the owner, if the intent here is that that lot is available for public use after 6 p.m. and on weekends, if that were clear, I'm not thinking about just like tonight and then many Monday nights. When people come to city council meetings, most people park across the street in that parking lot. Is that still going to be okay?
Yeah, well, we're going to sign that.
Yeah, the signage will be pretty specific, whether it's customer spaces with the 2-hour limit or employee spaces, parking by permit only. The hours will be on every sign at every entrance, so that not only is the intended daytime use clear, whether it's customer, employee, or tenant, but also the hours of enforcement or when those restrictions apply.
And likewise, I mentioned this to Mr. Walton when we spoke about this last week. The one of the messages I got from a concerned citizen was whether it was clear in this agreement that customer parking for the market on the square was included, not just the space that the city will use, but the part of what the city is using is for the customers to park there. And then also, well, this one individual asked, what about when you go to farmer's market, you park your car there, you shop farmer's market, then you're going to go over to Mirabelle's and the library. Can you leave your car, or are you going to have to move it? And if what we're really trying to do here is restrict employee parking, trying to keep people from using this as a free parking lot for employees during the day, Monday through Friday, but we're not trying to restrict who's parking in it at 8 o'clock on Monday nights, or how long they're there in the morning of farmers markets. I mean, to whatever extent, the most flexibility you're imagining, if you could put that in writing, that would help. Go ahead.
The farmers market will really operate just as it does now. The one thing that we will do differently under this new scheme is we'll absolutely assure that no residents can park in 10X. We have a little bit of that problem now, and sometimes we tow now in the very early morning in farmers market, but we cannot have any cars overnight on Friday night, for example, in that lot. So we've taken that into consideration. All the customer parking will operate exactly as it is now because we're not restricting it on weekends, other than the 30 residential parking spaces that we'll have out of 900. So it's really, for all intents and purposes, exactly the same as it is on every weekend.
Where will those 30 spaces be?
Well, we're going to try to put them in 24 or E.
Jenny South.
24?
There's 24. Oh, yeah.
Lower Street. 24
Just
or
30
E.
of those spaces. Because lot 24, as I mentioned to you, is a place where a lot of people park for farmers market on Saturday.
Right. But, in terms of what spaces out of those 900 spaces would be used, only 30 would be unavailable. So for all intents and purposes, it's exactly as it operates now. The difference being that from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. during the week, we're going to have these employee permits in 2 of these lots, and that rather than 3 hours free parking, it's 2 hours free parking, and that is specifically to eliminate theft of spaces.
And that won't be a problem for people using the fitness center? They're expected to be in and out in 2 hours?
We think so.
In the case that just like 3 hours today isn't enough time, Lincoln Square has the ability to take those tickets and void them and send them over to us. So that mechanism will remain in place also. Someone could go to the workout center and then go eat lunch or shop or whatever and be there more than 2 hours. So if legitimate customers get tickets, we have a mechanism to deal with that.
The time that it's really going to be crunch time in terms of parking is during the day, during the week. For everything else will operate generally as it operates now, but parking is going to be tight.
Well, if whatever you bring back to us says all that, so it's real clear, and we can tell people who've expressed concern that, that's the way it's going to work, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Alex.
In the interest of sticking with the agenda, my understanding is that ordinance -028, which is the parking lot designations, there's no proposed changes to that.
No.
I'd move approval of ordinance number 2005-02-28, an ordinance formalizing city parking lot designations.
Schedule R.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the designation of city parking lots. Any discussion? There's no discussion. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alex?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes? Ms. Pat?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
That motion carries with 7 ayes. Are there any other questions about item D then?
And now I would like to take up ordinance number 2005-02-029, an ordinance for which you have a corrected title, an ordinance amending Schedule N of Section 23-193 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code regarding parking time limit on certain streets or public parking lots, municipal parking lots 10-A-B-E-F-X and 3, 7, 8, and 15, and amending sections 23-177 and 23-249 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code.
Second.
I'd like to move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
And I would like to move to defer this
Second.
until the next city council meeting in order to
Second.
give staff
Have
time
any
to
other
work this out.
questions or comments before that? Okay, we'll go ahead. So we've got a motion to defer. And
Second.
did I hear a second and a second? So we'll see that in 2 weeks.
That is the end of the committee of the whole.
Information from Carl, or?
Yeah, I spoke to him.
Is there any objection to taking up item B again at this point? Okay.
I spoke to him. He hadn't been watching the meeting, so he wasn't familiar with the debate, so I attempted to recap it for him briefly. And essentially, it's a tough call to do on the fly. We spent a couple of weeks negotiating the lease, and his bottom line premise was he'd prefer that the lease were passed the way it was negotiated. His concern is, as much as Ms. Pat suggested, that with his initial investment and the time involved in relocating and establishing a new office, he wouldn't be anxious to just check all that away after 3 years.
Okay.
Well, in the interest of, since council members don't know how much was spent or that sort of thing, do you prefer that we just defer this? Or do you want to just see a vote?
Certainly, if the lease as included in the packets were unacceptable, I would then, take that back and try to negotiate something that I would understand to be more acceptable. But I suppose to know that, I would have to go to a vote as proposed.
All right. Well, then in that discussion, I think I appreciate what Ms. Chenoweth has proposed. I think it makes sense, given the additional information she provided to us about her conversations that she's had with potential tenants and other interested parties, and given the history of our discussions about what the community wants to see on that block. And I think it makes sense to either take out the section that Ms. Chenoweth proposed taking out, or having further conversations with Mr. Reisman regarding this lease.
I'm sorry, point of order. We're discussing the amendment to the motion?
The amendment to the lease,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
So that's my position. Thank you.
Chenoweth?
I think that we should, I urge people to support the amendment, and I think that if it's not acceptable, it will show the preference of the council in this, and if it's not acceptable, then, we go to round 2 to try to figure out something that is acceptable, and I don't consider this to be an acceptable lease with 18 at all, so I feel strongly about that, and I just don't feel like we've reviewed our options well enough at this time. And I feel like I've heard from the community very clearly about some of the things they would like to see on the library block, and this doesn't fit that, what I feel I've heard the community wants, and if there's possibility to do something else, I don't think we should turn that down. So I think 3 years is a reasonable amount of time. As a business owner, I've actually never signed a lease with an automatic option. It's always been, 3 years, it ends, and we renegotiate at that time. This is not an odd-shaped lease in any way for a business to sign, to know that they have 3 years, and we'll see what happens after that.
Alex?
I just have a question. I guess I feel differently. I mean, I would certainly prefer that this be a sales tax generating enterprise, as probably many of us do, but I'm not quite sure I understand the process which led up to the selection of this tenant. And I was wondering if we could get some clarification, because there seems to be some dispute.
Well, I think the first step was that we had a public hearing. Any time that we lease, we have to go through the same process as if we sell a property, and that includes a public hearing with then 45 days or 30 or 45 days between the time of the public hearing and then entering into that lease. At the public hearing, my recollection was that there was no public comment, and that so that when the opportunity was there for public comment on should we do an RFP or what kind of business do we want, nobody spoke at that time. And when the public hearing was over, then the space was advertised for lease. And I don't know if, Pat, were there anybody other than Mr. Reisman contact the city?
No, they didn't contact me.
Nobody contacted Mr. Paletti, and we entered into negotiations with Mr. Reisman for use of the space.
I mean, if that is indeed the scenario, I don't see how we can now go back and say, oh no, we only wanted to lease it under these terms. I mean, if there were competition for the space, I would understand the argument, but I guess I think we ought to probably stick with the lease we led the tenant to believe we were willing to sign.
It is true, perhaps, that Mr. Paletti did not hear from another individual, but Mr. Walden did hear from an individual, and I don't know if the mayor did, and that person was somebody who was interested in doing a European-style coffee shop in that location, and was told at that time, we're renting it to an attorney. That person told me that they responded to the ad in the paper the day after it was put in the paper, so I really don't. I feel like this was a done deal, maybe perhaps before it was supposed to be. I don't think I was present at the public meeting that was referred to. It must have been around the Christmas time era. And I think that it's appropriate for this council. It wouldn't be coming before council for us to review a lease unless it's appropriate for us to actually look at the terms of the lease. And never in our discussions have we talked about putting someone in there with automatic renewals, et cetera. So it is appropriate for council to be looking at the terms of the lease and determine whether or not it's in the city's best interest to go with those particular terms. The general conversation has been had, but the specifics haven't, and that's why we're here. We're here to look over the specifics of contracts, leases, budget amendments, et cetera, and determine if they're in the best interest or if they need alteration. So I don't see this, I don't know why we exist if we're not here to, if everything that we do is considered in the 11th hour and we shouldn't actually be doing it.
Mr. Roberts?
I think that it would be appropriate to contemplate an amendment to the lease. It hasn't been signed yet. It's still a fluid document. The council hasn't really had an opportunity to consider all the points of what the rental or the leasing might entail, and to have comments. At this time, that that it's important to the city to have options, perhaps in 3 years, to look at more opportune, retail-oriented commercial use of that corner, which actually has been part of the overall view of the discussion, I think, even when the building was preserved by the Historic Preservation Committee. So to me, I'm not sure that we've actually achieved the ultimate and best use of the property, and I think in 3 years we'll know, and we'll have a wider, maybe a larger view. And of course, the tenant can renew if nothing comes of this, or nobody really puts a project that's any better into view. And so there's nothing wrong with that, because that's how most leases are done anyways. So I'd be supportive of striking that, whatever number it was that made it a revolving lease, and bring it back to be discussed again in 3 years.
I'm sorry, I just got one more question. What's the extent of the city's ownership of this? My understanding, if I remember the library plan correctly, is that this is eventually theoretically going to be available for purchase to the library or transfer ownership to the library. What's the timeline there?
Well, I think we had 10 in there.
10 years.
No, it's longer than that, actually.
Yeah.
I guess I would ask, what is the longest term that the city could lease this property for if we wanted to? If we can't tell anybody it's going to be available for 20 years, if we got to sell it to the library in 10.
Well, it's in the second agreement that we have with the library board and the foundation, and exactly what it is off the top of my head I can't tell you, but it's in the neighborhood of 12 or 15 years, and then after that time, say after that initial 12-year period, if that's what it is, then the agreement says it will be leased for no more than 3-year increments after that. So basically it gives a window every 3 years for the library to say we need this property for something other than income property. But then I can't tell you exactly how long that term is. I think it's as I said before.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, the amendment is to strike item 18 out of this, out of the lease. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
That motion carries. Then to the ordinance, reports of officers.
I'd just do a quick ED report, and I'll pass these around. You have on your desk the monthly ED report. Just a couple of things to point out. Some of the more important things that we need to conclude here are to finish up the TIF 2 extension that's coming in the next month to the City Council. We need to finish that up. We're trying to finalize the 5 Points Northwest that's supposed to be closed this week. The Jewel Building agreement is being executed, and we're working with Holiday Inn on the site plans for their project. I would point out that we were hoping to get the 5 Points East agreement to you next week. I don't know if that's going to happen. It's probably going to be the 28th now before we can get that done. You have the report on the construction in terms of Build Urbana. And one of the things that is also new that's coming, we do have a couple of annexations, one being TK Wendell's, which will be interesting, and then in terms of the agreement, and then we have A&E Animal Hospital as well. So those are down 130 and on Windsor Road. So those are coming. What I've passed out to you is we've been working with the state of Illinois to see if we can't, as you know, there's a couple of things that we can do that are called for in the Philo Road plan. One was to consider TIF, the other one was to consider the extension of the Urbana Enterprise Zone. We've been working with state officials to figure out how to qualify that area. We do have one plan here that could be approved by the state. We're looking at it. We just wanted to pass it out to you now. We're going to start the process on this amendment to include these areas. As you know, the Enterprise Zone provides certain benefits for redevelopment and development. Most of those are paid for as incentives by the state of Illinois, not the least of which is the sales tax waiver and all building materials purchased in the state of Illinois that go into those rehabs. So, 6-7% difference on on building construction makes a difference, and that's a valuable tool. So we're looking very seriously at this, and I think we have a public hearing scheduled, or in the process of scheduling a public hearing to consider this. The process would require that we submit this to the state for approval, and we're working on it. They will come back to you at some point.
And lastly on our agenda, we have a couple items under new business. First is an ordinance approving a major variance to allow a 45% increase in the maximum allowable face area of a freestanding sign in the B1 Neighborhood Business Zoning District. This was ZBA case number 05-MAJ-1.
Thank you. In the interest of brevity, I'll keep this short. Aldi is requesting a major variance to increase the maximum allowable area of a freestanding sign. The Urbana zoning ordinance states that in the B1 neighborhood zoning district, each business is permitted one freestanding sign up to 32 square feet in face area per face. In the case where the lot has two frontages, one sign per frontage is permitted, provided, again, the cumulative square footage of both freestanding signs does not exceed 32 square feet in area. The petitioners wish to erect one freestanding monument sign with a face area of 46.3 square feet. That's a 45% increase beyond the permitted cumulative total. At the public hearing on February 16th, the Zoning Board of Appeals voted 4-1 to forward the variance request to the City Council with a recommendation for approval. The justification for the variance is that the City of Urbana, in the City of Urbana, parcel lots of similar size to the subject property, and those that are located in major intersections are more often zoned B3 general business. This parcel frontage at U.S. Route 150 and Illinois Route 130 has a wide drainage ditch in the right-of-way, and that makes the distance from the property line to the road edge approximately 65 feet, which is much further than that's typically found on most other B1 or even B3 zoned properties. The relatively large size of this property is what contributes to the applicant requesting a variance so their side could be more visible to passing traffic. And I will just read the first two of our variance criteria. First, are there special circumstances or special practical difficulties with reference to the parcel concerned in carrying out strict application? The special circumstance is that this large parcel is located at the intersection of two major arterial streets. Because of the very wide right-of-way containing a large ditch, the sign will be 65 feet away from the pavement edge, and the size of the lot and the extra right-of-way setback contribute to justification for a larger sign. Second criteria, that the proposed variance will not serve as a special privilege because the variance requested is necessary due to special circumstances relating to the land or structure. Again, it's not a special privilege because there are no other B1 zoned lots of such large size on two major arterial roadways. Other B1 zoned properties do not have similar issues of the wide right-of-way setback from the road edge, and most parcels in the city that are zoned B1 are much smaller and are located within older neighborhoods where development is more compact and where a larger sign than that allowed would have a greater impact on adjacent land uses. Council has the options to grant the variance subject to certain terms and conditions, or to deny the variance request. And based on the findings outlined herein, in this case, the Zoning Board of Appeals voted 4-1 to forward the variance request to City Council with a recommendation for approval. Staff concurs and recommends that the City Council grant the variance with the condition that the freestanding monument sign be constructed in substantial conformity with attached site plan illustrating the design and location. I'll leave it open to questions. We do have some visual materials if we need to take a look at those. And I'd like to thank the representatives from Aldi for sticking with us. And they're available for questions too.
Okay, any questions for Paul tonight? If there are no questions, a motion will be in order.
I would move to accept the ordinance and accept the monumental freestanding sign as indicated in the ordinance.
Approval, is there a second? Second. Motion and a second. Any discussion? Yes, Mr. Alex?
Just one thing. I was not in attendance as a plan commission or when this came up, and I'd just like to say, I guess as a matter of precedent, I think this is an example of how we should not do zoning. I mean, we declared this B1 to a large extent at the request, if I remember correctly, of the developer, with the intention that this parcel be used for uses that would complement the surrounding residential area, which is what B1 is intended to be for. We ended up then granting variances to allow a larger use than was originally intended. It was a use that clearly many in the neighborhood felt did not complement the adjacent residential use. Without making any comments on the quality of the business, because I'm sure it'll be a fine business, my complaints here are not with what's going there, it's in the process by which we got there. And I would hope that in the future we'd be more realistic about looking at these parcels and what the appropriate zoning designation was, because what we basically have here is going to be a B3 use with a B3 sign, with B3 buffering to the surrounding neighborhood, and for all practical purposes, on two main highways. I mean, for all practical purposes, this is a B3 lot, and I'm concerned that if we continue to zone things B1 with the idea of getting more regulatory power over them and then caving in and granting variances to allow them to be B3 intensity, that we're weakening what B1 is supposed to be for. And I'll get off my soapbox because I will certainly approve this sign in lieu of what this parcel's become.
Yeah, just to clarify one thing, I think the city didn't do the zoning. That was the automatic transfer of zoning from when it was annexed into the city, from the county zoning to the city zoning. So it was zoned what was the closest zoning. And so that's why it went to B1. It was automatically went to B1. I think that's right. That's right. So it wasn't that we designated it B1. That's what it was designated when it came into the city. It was the closest to what it was.
Okay. I remember the zoning being considered, at least with regard to the appropriateness of the designation, and I think at the time it was certainly planned that this would be more B1 use than what it is.
Well, I think you're right in that the developer certainly indicated to home buyers and anybody else that would listen that it would be more of a B1 use than B3 use. Now, that's not ultimately what happened.
No, I understand, and I want to make it clear I have no objection to the proposed use or to the business that's going there. I think it'll be a positive development. I just think it's a negative precedent for us to set with regard to B1 zones elsewhere in the city.
Any other discussion? Yes, Ms. Pat?
I agree, which is why I'm voting no. I did support the special use permit because there was a trade-off, but I agree that, well, I won't say I agree, I'm not sure if this is what you're saying, but I feel that saying that, well, it's such a big lot, it shouldn't be treated like B1 is not a justification for variance under our ordinance. It is B1, and there is not really a special circumstance that warrants a variance.
Any other discussion?
I think everything on this lot is B3 except the zoning at this point, so I think it would be impractical to oppose the variance, but I appreciate the sentiment.
Jonathan?
I'm going to be supporting this because it's one of the special circumstances. It's at the corner of two state highways. We have a wall that effectively separates the neighborhood from the property, and there's a ditch that creates visibility problems. So I think there is a special circumstance here. I don't think the special circumstance is that it's B1, but I think there are other special circumstances, and I applaud Aldi for doing a monumental sign at this area, which I think is much more tasteful than what we have in other parts of the community. And honestly, I think that in the future, as we revise our zoning ordinance, I think we should consider monumental signs like this to be what we do instead of billboard-type signs, which would have been an allowable alternative for Aldi in this case. And I'm glad they didn't go that route because I think it's ugly, and I think it'll make the place look bad. And so.
Any other discussion? Yes, Mr. Roberts?
I just concur. This sign came in not very much larger than it could have. It was designed with much more thoughtful attention to looks. Its placement is appropriate, and it is far back set from the highway because of the large water ditch in front of it and just the construction of the property line. So I think they have a right to want to have a sign that's just slightly larger, and they haven't gone mega sign. I think all in all, even though it's a bad situation from very many reasons, I support it. This sign, we're voting on the sign, not the lot, so.
Any other discussion? If there's no other discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alec?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Ms. Pat?
No.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
That motion carries with 6 ayes. And finally, this ordinance approving a major variance to allow a 124% increase in the maximum allowable area of a freestanding sign and to allow a reader board with electronically chargeable LED letters in the B3 General Business Zoning District. This is ZBA case 05-MAJ-02.
Do you need to extend time for the staff report?
Move to extend time for 10 minutes?
Second.
Go until 11:10 now.
The pressure's on. This is 2 variance requests by the Blackstone Group. The first is for 124% increase in the maximum allowable area of a freestanding sign in the B3 General Business Zoning District, which allows up to 50 square feet. And in this particular location, there are 2 frontages, so there would be an allowance for a combined total of 100 square feet. Proposed sign size is 111.96 square feet in area, 89 square feet roughly in sign face panel, and 23 square feet in a changeable reader board. The second variance would allow that reader board to be constructed as part of the sign with electronically changeable LED light-emitting diode rather than manually changeable letters. And this type of signage is not currently explicitly allowed in the zoning ordinance, although we are considering a text amendment to allow that. The Zoning Board of Appeals reviewed the request on February 16th and recommended approval with a unanimous vote of 5-0 and the addition of conditions. There was discussion and opposition, and that's summarized in the minutes that are attached to the staff report. The opposition from Mr. Roberts relating to the proposed height at 25 feet high and the style of signage being freestanding versus monument. The Zoning Board of Appeals were also concerned about the aesthetic aspects, and there was discussion about what would be allowed by right at this location according to the zoning ordinance, and as represented by the Walgreens or Blackstone representative, that they would, in lieu of the variances, the intent was to construct 2 side-by-side 50-square-foot signs with a manual message board, and the thought was that that would provide a more cluttered appearance, but very much interested by Walgreens in constructing their standard industry sign, which is what they're requesting. There have been subsequently more specific requests to Walgreens to consider a monument sign at this location, and given that virtually all of their signage in the vicinity of Cunningham and University is of the pylon type or freestanding type, the Walgreens does want to construct their standard signage, which is a pylon sign, rather than the monument alternative. So that discussion's been held and explored. I won't at this point talk any more about what the zoning ordinance requires versus what's proposed. There is some allowance for LED electronic signs, but only as part of a community event sign. And really, since we've amended the zoning ordinance, this type of technology is now available and economical to substitute for the current fashion of message boards with the manually changeable messages. So this is really an alternative to that. Under variance criteria, special circumstance, here we're looking at an intersection of 2 arterial streets with relatively high speeds of traffic. It's the It's on the northern edge of the downtown, but really it's part of a Cunningham Avenue and University Avenue commercial corridors. There's plenty of distance between the edge of pavement to the sign location that would promote an increased sign face for improved visibility. And in the petition represents that combining the sign face allowances would provide for a cleaner appearance. There's a history of granting combined sign face allowances in other cases in the city, and this additional sign face would allow for their effective message board. Special privilege, again, we're looking at somewhat of a unique configuration and traffic exposure for Urbana. This is our highest volume intersection, and few other major retail intersections exist in the area. The city's considered similar circumstances for combined sign face allowances. The message board is unique in that it's a relatively new technology that hasn't been anticipated in the zoning ordinance. The variance is not yet required. It's a request by the petitioner. Character of the neighborhood is highly commercial, and there are numerous freestanding signs in the location, including billboards and multiple signage on lots, and different shapes and sizes of signage. Would not cause a nuisance to the surrounding commercial properties. And is this the minimum deviation? This is the industry standard produced by Walgreens, and that is the request by the petitioner to meet that industry standard. The options, again, are to grant or deny one or both of the requested major variances. We've separated those out. There are a number of conditions. First, for the sign area variance, that it be constructed in conformity with their submitted site plan, that there be a landscape plan, including significant ornamental plantings to soften the appearance, and that these be shown on a landscape plan that's reviewed and approved by city arborist and the Urbana zoning administrator. And we've subsequently talked about more extensive landscaping throughout the site, replacement of trees, and just softening of the edge along University and Cunningham. And in our negotiations in reviewing the site plan, we've talked about relocating sidewalk along Cunningham so there's a better pedestrian way. And these are all things that Walgreens has approved or has agreed to do. Thirdly, that this be the only freestanding sign to be constructed for the Walgreens drugstore. And as requested by the zoning board, that the petitioner consider the aesthetic aspects of the height of the sign as well as the commercial aspects. For the LED, it be limited to size to no more than the 23 square feet proposed. It shall not be animated, flashing, multicolored, or scrolling in any manner so as to avoid motorist distraction, and that the frequency of the message change shall be restricted to no more than once every 3 minutes. So also sticking with us tonight is Joe Hurwitz and Dennis Vahovich, who are here from Blackstone Group to answer any questions.
Any questions with staff? Ms. Chenoweth?
Just, it was my impression that the Walgreens sign at Madison, Springfield, and Champaign is the size that we were considering tonight, and then I was told that it wasn't. But then I've also been told that this larger sign, that the one in Champaign is smaller, but then I've been told that this larger sign is the industry standard. So I'd like to hear from Walgreens, which is it? Is it that we're building a sign that's the same size in Champaign, and that's the industry standard, or is it that the industry standard changed since we built one in Champaign, or what?
I'm Joe Hurwitz. How are you?
Hello.
The sign in Champaign, we did not construct it, so I'm not certain. We did build the store. At the time that store was built, it was actually a manual reader board. So it's been changed. I don't know where you heard it was the same.
I didn't hear it was the same. It was in our packet as an example of a Walgreens sign, and so I assumed it was the same. And
this is the existing Walgreens, and you have one that's proposed. So we're assuming it's 2 lines of text. We're assuming that's the same on the message.
I don't know the square footage of this sign.
Okay. So,
I apologize. I just don't know.
That's okay, but
it is the same style.
It's a different size.
It is the same style of sign.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I've actually had a fair amount of input on the sign on this corner, and but it was at the Zoning Board of Appeals, and I I was not in favor of it for several reasons, and I think if you read your packet information, you might have read some of the things I was discussing. I did talk to you Friday and asked you to forward the city's desire to have this corner be treated in consideration that it is designated gateway to the city of Urbana, and we felt that an overlarge, gigantic sign on the corner specifically would be less appropriate for gateway kind of articulation, such as is indicated in the strategic downtown plan for just across the street from it on the northwest corner of University and Cunningham, should that property become available to us. And that the city's general concern for this corner has changed since even a year ago, as far as how we're viewing it and the kinds of development we're seeing on it. So I had asked whether the Walgreens would like to partner with us and establish, like for the first time, or to begin to establish a different kind of signage, basically a monument sign. And you talked to them this morning, and you can tell me what they said, perhaps, so everybody will know here.
No, well, we did, in fact, bring it up to the senior real estate manager of Walgreens. To back up for a second, Walgreens, when we take these projects to real estate committee, we do a significant amount of research, and that research includes signage, parking, landscaping, and all those types of things. So when it goes to the real estate committee, Walgreens understands that they are allowed by right 2 50-square-foot, 25-foot high pylons. And that's how the deal gets approved. Walgreens does an extensive amount of research. Walgreens does a huge amount of demographics. And when you look at the traffic at this corner and you start talking about putting a monument sign on the northeast side, with all the traffic back up and all of the trucks and the state route and all of those types of things, there's a significant amount of time where signage would not be visible. So Walgreens feels in order to compete, and I did ask that question, Mr. Roberts, and they were very kind and said that based on the competition that's in the market, based on the retail configuration of all the additional signs, and based on the committee approval, they would like to live with what's by right, which is in essence 100 square feet. We could go panel to panel, but we feel it's more advantageous for everybody involved to have one sign with 2 poles that in essence is 12 feet larger than what's allowed by code.
And can you explain what panel by panel or panel to panel is?
Well, you can group, by your code, you can group your signs.
On the same posts, you would have 2 signs?
No, there'd be 4 posts, is my understanding. Is that not correct?
Or you could cantilever.
Or we could cantilever, so it would give the same effect.
So there'd be like a sign basically joined at the hip or something?
Correct. That's correct.
Those are 2 signs.
Yeah, but that's a monumental sign, and those are stacked.
No, but by code, Mr. Roberts, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm incorrect, but when we did all of our previous research to get this project approved at Walgreens Real Estate Committee, we knew, that worst case scenario, we had 100 square foot of signage grouped.
Yes.
And so what we feel is by doing the industry standard, which is our terminology, with the LED that doesn't scroll, isn't animated, and doesn't flash, we feel we give a much more aesthetically pleasing sign than what's, for instance, at Arby's or McDonald's or some of the other signs that are, again, there by right.
In your discussion with city staff, did they request a monument sign be placed there originally or during the discussion?
Mr. Roberts, I'll be candid with you. We've been on this corner for over 5 years because we were going to go on the other corner, and there's been lots and lots of conversations. But this project, I don't recall on this particular project any specific conversation along those lines, simply because when we went from the northwest corner to the northeast corner, we were just really excited about getting a project completed and opened and operating. So what we did, we took the project to committee. We provided to them the signed code, which is part of the committee packet, and that's what we'd like to move forward with the minor, in our opinion, it's a somewhat minor variance because it's 12 square feet over what is allowed to be by code grouped.
Okay. For the moment, I am, yeah.
I understand this sign that we have in front of us, Mr. Roberts has himself designed.
That's right.
That is the
front page.
Yeah. I recall having a commission in Springfield to design some signs. And one of the signs I had to design was for a church. But it was the traffic was along one side of the highway, not at an intersection. And I designed a sign exactly like this for that purpose. Good design, Dennis. If I do say so myself. But I think the question of the intersection and the traffic changes that. And that is to say, because of the trucks and they need visibility. Signs are meant for visibility and for telling people, communication, telling people what is available. And I think that the request to join these or to enlarge the sign and reduce the number of signs is a fair exchange. And so I think that we should approve it.
Mr. Alex?
Move to extend to 11:25.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Did you want to speak to, or did you just want to extend time?
I'll speak when there's a motion.
Any other questions, Ms. Pat?
Thank you. A question, well, first from Mr. Heiler. What it says in the memo, my understanding of the ordinance is that they can't have two 50-square-foot signs side by side. They can have one on the Cunningham Avenue frontage and one on the University Avenue frontage. Is that correct?
Zoning ordinance is silent about placement other than setback. In practice, we've allowed signs to be located on corners, and there's an example here with the Apple Tree Plaza it's on the corner. We're not saying this part is the Crystal Lake section and this part is the Cunningham Avenue. Then there's another example, the Circle K. I'm looking at Exhibit F, which has one that's more clearly on one street, in this case Bradley, and the other on Lincoln. So the zoning ordinance really doesn't say, it doesn't dictate where along the frontage it's allowed to be. There's one sign allowed for each 300 square feet of each business frontage. So in practice, you could group your 250s on the corner.
How many feet what is the frontage of on the University Avenue side of the store?
Both frontages are something over 300 square feet for the Walgreens property, but not...
I mean linear feet, right?
Linear feet, exactly, yeah. And you could even...
So they could be next to each other at the corner, but they couldn't be side by side on one side or the other to be consistent with our ordinance if they had two signs. One would have to be on the University Avenue side and one would have to be on the Cunningham side.
It's not exactly a straight corner. I think the location they've shown is both on both frontages, essentially. And it really does not, the zoning ordinance does not provide any guidance as to placement. It gives you an allowance per frontage.
And there will also be huge letters that say Walgreens on the building, right?
There will be signage on the building that we've already provided to staff that meets code.
Right. And
That is correct.
And it's like all the other Walgreens stores.
Essentially, yes.
Well, my opinion is I'm so delighted Walgreens is coming to this corner. I'm so sorry that the people at Walgreens want to do something ugly and aren't agreeable to our interest in making the gateway to our downtown attractive. I think that's a real shame. There is not a signage need to justify this, because if you've ever seen a Walgreens, you know, before you ever notice their signs up in the air, you notice the big words Walgreens on the store, and you'll be able to see it from probably a farther distance. I don't know how big they are, but I think when I went by the other two Walgreens stores, it seems like the sign on the store is bigger than the sign in front of the store. But I think having one big sign that's over 100 square feet is worse than having two signs that are 50.
Entertaining any questions for staff or for the developer? Questions? If not, a motion would be in order then.
Move approval.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Wondering if it would be appropriate to actually just divide the question, and if we want to first, as we're discussing or speaking in support or in opposition to the motion, if it's appropriate to first divide the question or divide it when people are ready to take the final vote on it. But I expect to vote differently on the two, and that's why
Divided, if you
I'll move then further to divide the question.
Okay, so what, what part do you want to entertain?
Isn't it divided already? I mean, it's, okay.
It's on the agenda as one item.
Yeah. It's one or
Well, I second that motion.
Well, if you want to divide it, then you need to make a motion separating out what part you want divided.
Sorry, I move to divide the question so that, basically, yeah, the size, the allowance of 124% increase in the maximum allowable area of freestanding sign as one, and then the second, or the other part would be regarding allowing a reader board with electronically changeable LED letters in the B3 General Business Zoning District.
Which would you rather tackle first?
I'd rather tackle the first one first.
So your
Please.
motion is to approve the variance to allow a sign 124% larger than the maximum allowable area of sign face.
Yes, it is.
Okay, and was there a second to that?
I would second that.
I have a second. Okay, floor is open for discussion on that motion. Mr. Alex?
Try to be brief. I'm in favor of supporting the ZBA's recommendation in its entirety. I think that one large sign is preferable to two small signs in terms of reducing clutter. I'm not going to second guess Walgreens marketing people if they believe that the size of the sign is in line with what they believe they need to market the property, then I support that. I do have a comment about precedent, because I've heard from a number of people who are, supportive of the notion of monument signs and concerned that this gateway intersection was deserving of something other than pylon signs. I don't actually feel that there's an issue on the northeast corner of that intersection, but I hope that future councils and staff will consider the northwest and southwest corners of that intersection as being potentially more restrictive when it comes to variances. The southwest corner has been designated in the downtown strategic plan as a gateway to downtown, and there's some specific artists' renderings that indicate what might go there in the event that that parcel was redeveloped, and I think that's an area where we need to be very sensitive to the appearance of signage. And the northwest corner of that intersection is directly in the sight line from southbound Cunningham Avenue to the courthouse area, which I think is a vista people are familiar with in Urbana, and it's been specifically discussed in a couple of corridor studies on the downtown plan. And I guess what I'm saying is that I'm supportive of this variance solely on the strength of this particular project and this particular parcel, but I would be a lot less inclined to want to see something like this being done on the northwest or the southwest corners in light of their significance with the master plan. I think in this case, University Avenue provides a pretty clear delineation between the commercial-oriented uses to the north and the more downtown-oriented uses to the south, and I think that this is an appropriate request, and I will support it.
Okay, any additional discussion, Mr. Roberts?
One of the basic reasons for the argument to have a larger sign is the amount of traffic and the fact that this is like a very busy intersection. Citing the volume of traffic on University Avenue. Well, there are other businesses on University Avenue that are on corners that then you could argue would require a variance so that their signs could be larger because traffic is passing so much faster. And some of these, just think of the variance that might have been asked for by Collins Gas or Red's Muffler Shop or Balloon Creations or other businesses along, the whole strip of University Avenue. Which, the one particular reality of this intersection is that there is a long red light which you sit at while you're waiting for it to change. And if there's ever a chance to view a sign, it will be at that moment. And these are, so I find that the reason to ask for the variance is fictitious or not very well supported. And since we're just talking about the size of the sign, it is it was 124% larger than by right, which is certainly not just 2 50-foot signs put together, but it exceeds by a huge percent the allowable right. And it becomes a rather dominant figure. It's going to become a rather dominant, prominent feature of that corner, which I still think, even though it's not favored or mentioned as much as the southwest corner as a gateway area, it's certainly on the same gateway corner or intersection. And I feel the odd thing was that in the conversation that I got from Joe after discussing with him on the phone that Walgreens wasn't interested in having a monument-based sign on the corner, was that in the future, if there was an ordinance that requested that monument signs be the tall signs be phased out and monument signs be the new end sign for the beautification of Cunningham, that they'd be happy to lower it. And I thought that was like speaking from two sides of their mouth at the same time. And so it seems to me that if they were able to lower it in three years at our request, why wouldn't they be able to consider it today? I would go for a larger sign if it was based on a monument base. I would make that compromise, I guess. But I'm not. I just don't feel in favor of. I don't see that they're making an appropriate case for the hugeness that they're asking for.
Okay, Ms. Chenoweth?
I'm going to be supporting this because I think the problem is with our ordinance and not with Walgreens' request. We shouldn't be able to say you can have a 50-foot sign, but then there's a way to combine two signs into one sign and just have 4 posts and call it 2 signs. And that's a problem. What businesses need is to be able to see what the ground rules are and play by those ground rules and move forward with development in the community. And if our ground rules are misleading and say, well, it looks like you can have up to 100 square feet, but actually, we really want you to have a monument sign, that's not really, it's giving a lot of mixed messages. And I think it's no one's fault in particular, it's just the fault of having code that is 40 years old and hasn't been, it's been updated piecemeal for those 40 years, but after this comprehensive plan process is over, I really think that we need to look at overhaul of our codes, which includes our signage. And I think that when I talk to businesses, they just want to know what the rules are, and they don't want the target to move. So if we can set the rules and make sure the target doesn't move, then they're going to feel comfortable coming into our community and being able to do things in our community. So I think it's an ugly sign, and I'm supporting an ugly sign. But I think that it's what's allowed by our rules, with some exceptions. It's 20% greater than that, and so I'll support this variance. But I think that we are going to need to look at our ordinance overall in the future.
Further discussion, Ms. Pat?
Thank you. This is not what's allowed by our rules, or we wouldn't be voting on it. This is a variance from our rules, and there has to be a good reason for variance, which I don't feel there is here. I agree that there's a problem with our ordinance in terms of sign pollution. We allow more than we should. We will allow signs that are too big and too tall. In a number of cases, we've granted variances where the owner by right could have, for example, 2 50-foot signs and instead asks for 1 70-square-foot sign. And the rationale there is that less space is being taken up by signs. We're getting the sign will be larger than what one would be, but we get only 1 instead of 2. I know I voted on several of those. That's not what this proposal is. This proposal is to combine the 2 and make it even bigger still. And one can be hopeful that as far as the development of this intersection, that future council shares Mr. Alex's view, but I bet money that's not the way it goes. In fact, the next property owner who asks for a variance to have a bigger sign than two small, the two that are allowed combined on one of those other corners is going to cite this as the rationale if we did it for them, and that's how these things keep spreading. I would urge folks to think about what, I mean, as Ms. Chenoweth said, business just want to know what the rules are. If the rules are set in our zoning ordinance, let's ask the businesses to play by the rules that are set out. They knew when they came in that that's what it would be. There's no reason for this variance, and I urge a no vote.
Ms. Wyman?
I had asked for this to be divided. I was intending to vote yes on this because I believe that having one sign is better than having two signs as far as sign pollution. Given the discussion tonight, I'm swayed and intend to vote no on both. Thank you.
Any other discussion? If not, will the clerk please call the roll?
We have a clarification on what we're voting on.
Voting on the ability to have one 112-foot sign.
124, I believe? Or, I'm sorry, 124% increase. You're right.
111-foot sign.
Thank you.
12 square foot.
Yeah, square foot.
With the conditions and the,
Yeah, with the
in the
condition.
ordinance.
Mr. Alex?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Ms. Pat?
No.
Mr. Roberts?
No.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
No.
That motion carries with 4 ayes. Do you want to make that motion on the other part since you wanted it divided originally? or-
Sure, I move to allow a reader board with electronically changeable LED letters in the B3 General Business Zoning District, which is the second part of the case number ZBA 05MAJ-02, with the conditions set and proposed by the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? There's no discussion. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alex?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes? Ms. Pat?
No.
Mr. Roberts?
No.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
No.
I'm sorry.
That motion carries with 4 ayes. And with that, there's no further business to come before us this evening, and we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Oh, okay.